A single laser dot trembles across cracked concrete on the 61st floor. Adrian Cole checks the reading twice. The number is wrong. The number is very wrong. She is 27, black, an architect fighting for her municipal certification. Voss and Hart handed her one job: sign off on the sealed penthouse of the Halston Tower without looking. She refused. So at 8 in the morning, alone, she looks. Low-density concrete. A wall shifted off its line, and behind a loose panel, a folder no one meant her to find. Photos. Forged reports. So deeds to affordable homes that were never meant to exist. She calls her supervisor, Martin Voss. Navy suit, thin glasses, a smile for the clients. She trusts him for exactly one phone call. Then the network drops. The door won't open. The office locks around her. Her fingers shake. She dials for help and misses a single digit. The call lands in the wrong pocket. The pocket of Kang Tae-ho. The Iron Phoenix. 6'4", ivory shirt open at the collar. A phoenix inked in black down the right side of his neck. A Korean mafia boss, one building over, handling his mother's properties. 9 minutes away, a stranger's voice, a dying signal. But what she carried out of that room was never supposed to leave it. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The pen slid across the desk toward her, and Adrian Cole let it stop against her knuckles without picking it up. Sign the top sheet, Martin Voss said. Initial the rest. 10 minutes and you're back on your own projects. The document sat under the pen. Preliminary occupancy release. Halston Tower, floor 61. Her name was already printed at the bottom in a gray font, waiting for ink. She read the first line twice. Then she looked up. I haven't inspected 61. That's what the release is for. Voss smiled the way he smiled in front of clients. All teeth and no eyes. It certifies the preliminary condition. Preliminary. The word does the work. The word means I looked. The word means the firm looked. You're the firm today. He tapped the desk once. Margaret's in Zurich. Hart signs the finals. You clear the preliminary. That's the chain. It's been the chain for 6 years. Then wait for Margaret. Margaret's back Friday. The board sits Thursday. He spread his hands, patient, a man explaining arithmetic to a child. You're the certified official on site. You're not being asked to invent anything. You're being asked to move a page. She thought about the 8 months, the clipboards, the floors she'd walked at dawn before the crews came up, measuring a building the way a doctor listens to a chest. She thought about the day Margaret Hart had found her doing exactly that. Early, alone, unpaid, checking her own work twice, and had said, "That's the one." Careful had been the whole story of her. Careful had carried her out of a walk-up in the Bronx and into this glass room. She was not about to spend it on a page she hadn't read. Adrian slid the pen back an inch, off her hand. The conference room on the 40th floor of Voss and Hart smelled of new carpet and cold coffee. Through the glass wall behind Voss, the city stacked itself into haze. She kept her eyes on him. The municipal certification runs through my license number, she said. Not the firm's. Mine. Which is why you're valued here. Which is why I inspect before I certify. The smile held, but something behind his glasses cooled. He straightened the cuff of his navy jacket. On the wall behind him, framed, the Halston Tower rendering glowed. 62 floors of glass, the crown lit gold, a building the firm had bet its next decade on. Adrian. He said her name like a man setting down a heavy box. The penthouse level is interdicted. You know that. City sealed it 3 weeks ago pending review. There is nothing up there for you to inspect. It's an empty shell with caution tape. The release simply moves the paperwork so the review board can schedule. Then, the release doesn't need my number until the seal lifts. It needs your number today. 12 seconds passed. She counted them without meaning to. Why today? She said. Voss leaned back. The chair took his weight. Because the board meets Thursday, and if the preliminary isn't filed Monday, the whole tower slips a quarter. Do you understand what a quarter costs on a project this size? Do you understand who eats it? I understand who signs it. Do you? He rose halfway from the chair and reached across the table and turned the release around, so the printed name faced her right way up. Adrian Cole, certified building official, license number underneath, the 7 digits that were the only thing in this city that belonged entirely to her. There it is, yours. You built that #1 honest inspection at a time. I know how you built it. I was in the room when Margaret argued for you. Then you know I'm not signing this. I know you think you're not. He sat again. People change their minds when they understand the room they're standing in. I understand who signs it, she said again, and then stopped herself, because she'd promised she wouldn't repeat a thing in this meeting, and she'd just done it, and the small failure told her how thin she was stretched. He didn't answer that. He picked up the pen himself, turned it over in his fingers, set it down again, pointed at her now, not at the paper. You came out of nowhere, he said, quieter. 27, youngest certified building official the firm's ever fielded. Margaret pulled you up because you're careful. Careful is good. Careful put you in this room. A pause. Careful can also put you back on the street it found you on. Be careful about which kind of careful you are. Adrian stood. She did it slowly, and she gathered the release as she rose, folded it once, lengthwise, and slid it into the outer sleeve of the portfolio she'd carried in. Her Metador, the laser measure, clicked against the case's zipper. I'll inspect it, she said. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. I'll pull the seal exemption for a certified official, walk 61 myself, and if it's a clean shell, I'll file the preliminary by noon, with my number on it, and everyone's happy. She lifted the strap onto her shoulder. That's careful. The other thing you're describing is my signature on a room I've never seen. Voss watched her from the chair. He didn't stand. That, more than anything he'd said, told her she'd read the meeting right. 8 a.m., he repeated. 8. Alone. The exemption's single official. I'll have the badge cleared at the desk. Fine. He smiled again, and this time it reached nowhere at all. You're a very careful woman, Miss Cole. She was already at the door when he added, I hope that's the story people tell about you. She let the door close on the sentence. In the elevator, she pressed 40 and then, on reflex, pressed nothing else, and rode down alone watching the numbers fall. Her reflection stood in the brushed doors, the emerald blouse, the ivory trousers, the portfolio strap cutting across her chest. She looked composed. Her hands, folded on the case, were not. She pressed them flat until they were. The exemption wasn't strange. A single official inspection of a sealed floor was standard. The badge at the desk wasn't strange. Voss not standing when she left, that was strange. A man that's certain of his ground stood, walked you to the door, shook your hand, sold you the ending. A man who stayed seated had already decided the ending happened somewhere you weren't. She rode to the lobby. She told herself she was tired. The lobby had emptied. She stood a moment by the water feature they kept running past hours, the sound of it filling the marble, and she pulled up Margaret's number and let her thumb rest over it. Margaret would know how to read Voss. Margaret always knew how to read a room she wasn't in. But it was past 10 in Zurich, and a preliminary release was not an emergency, and Adrian Cole did not wake her mentor over a meeting she'd already won. She closed the phone and put it away and walked out under the awning, and she did not look back at the number she had almost dialed. At the desk, the night attendant looked up. Miss Cole, something for you. He slid a laminated badge across the marble. Halston Tower, official access, 61, single entry, cleared for 08 o'clock. Voss had cleared it before the meeting, before she'd said yes. She held the badge under the light and read the timestamp twice. Then she put it in the zippered pocket of the portfolio, the inside one, and walked out into the evening with her step a little slower than it had been. She was on the sidewalk of Halston Tower at 7:50 the next morning, 30 minutes early, watching the crown of the building catch the low sun. 62 floors. She'd walked 12 of them over the last 8 months, clipboard by clipboard, and she knew the tower the way you know a body you've examined, where it was sound, where it complained. Floors 8 through 50 were clean. 51 to 60 she'd flagged, cleared, reflagged, cleared. 61 and the penthouse crown she had never once been allowed above. The lobby was empty at that hour. Her boot heels came back at her off the stone. The day desk hadn't started. A single security guard sat behind the counter, and he glanced at her badge, glanced at his screen, and buzzed the service elevator without a word. 61's still sealed, he said. You know that. I have the exemption. Not saying you don't. He went back to his screen. Saying the elevator only goes to 60, you walk the last flight. Stairs are past the freight doors. Understood. She stood a moment longer on the sidewalk before she went in. Across the avenue, a second tower rose behind scaffolding, its lower floors wrapped, a discreet sign at the hoarding she didn't read. A black car sat at its curb with the engine running. She noted it the way she noted everything, a fact filed, unweighted, and pushed through Halston's revolving door. The service car smelled of grease and cold metal. It climbed slow. She watched the floor numbers tick and made herself breathe on a count. 60. The doors opened on a raw corridor. Bare studs, plastic sheeting, the smell of curing concrete. She followed the freight signage to a stairwell, pushed through, and climbed the last flight to a landing, where yellow tape crossed a steel door in an X. City of, sealed, do not enter. She lifted the tape at the corner where it met the frame. The seal was intact. The exemption number matched. She logged the time on her phone. 8:04, photographed the intact seal, and only then broke it, cleanly, the way the protocol wanted, so the break would timestamp against her entry, and no one could say she'd been up here before. The door was heavier than it should have been. She put her shoulder to it. It gave. 61 opened in front of her, and she stopped on the threshold to let her eyes adjust. It was a shell, like Voss said. Concrete floor, exposed columns, the glass curtain wall running the full perimeter with the city hung behind it. Ductwork overhead. Rebar stubs where the penthouse stair would rise. Empty. She almost turned around. Instead, she did what she always did. She started at the northeast corner and walked the perimeter clockwise, one hand trailing the column line, her laser measure clicking distances she already knew from the plans. Habit, discipline. The building complained where it always complained and stayed quiet where it stayed quiet, and she was nearly to the west face, nearly convinced, when the sound under her boot changed. She stopped, stepped back, stepped forward again. The floor answered wrong. Concrete has a voice. A slab poured to spec came back dead and flat under a heel, a solid nothing. This came back with a faint give, a hollowness a half-tone too high. She crouched. She took the small hammer from the side pocket of the portfolio and tapped, once, twice, moving in a slow arc. Dead, dead. Then, under the west windows, a 2-meter stretch, a lighter ring. Wrong. She worked the arc wider. The lighter ring held its shape, a clean rectangle in the slab, the exact footprint of a form that had been poured separately and finished flush. Nobody patches a floor that size by accident. Somebody had cut this section out and re-poured it with the wrong mix, and troweled the seam smooth so a visual walkthrough would never catch it. Low-density concrete, undercured, over-aerated, the kind that passed a visual and failed a core. She knew it in her wrist before she knew it in her head. She pulled the plans up on her phone, thumbed to the pour schedule for 61, and there it was, in black and white. Full-density structural mix, certified, signed off. Signed off by a lab she'd never heard of. She photographed the floor. She photographed the plan on her screen beside it, sun angle logged, time logged, 8:31. Then she stood and turned toward the west wall to sight the column line, and saw the second thing. The wall was in the wrong place. Not by much, a hand's width, maybe less. But she'd measured this tower for 8 months, and her eye was a ruler now, and the interior partition that fed the west columns sat off its grid line, shoved outward, as if something behind it needed the room. She crossed to it. She ran the laser from the fixed column to the wall face, then from the plan dimension, 41 centimeters off. A partition doesn't wander 41 centimeters. Someone moved it. Someone built it to hide the distance it had traveled. She ran the measure a second time to be sure, and a third, because a number this clean was the kind a review board dismissed as operator error unless you nailed it down. 41, 41, 41. She logged all 3 readings with the timestamp, then panned the camera slow along the wall so the footage carried its own proof of continuity. No cuts, no gaps, a single unbroken pass from the fixed column to the crooked seam. She set her palm flat against the panel and pushed. It flexed. Behind gypsum there should be stud and stud alone. This flexed like there was a cavity behind it. An inch of air where a wall should be solid to the frame. Adrian stood very still with her hand on the wall, and the city burning gold behind the glass. And for the first time since Voss slid the pen at her, she felt the thing in her stomach that careful people feel a beat before they understand they've walked into something. She should have photographed it and left, filed it, made it a paragraph, a flag, a number for the board. She took her hammer, found the panel seam, and pulled. The gypsum came away in a sheet, screws shrieking out of soft anchors, and behind it the cavity opened. A shallow space framed into the wall, deliberate, finished. A hollow made to hold something and give it back to no one. A document case sat inside. Hard shell, matte black, the kind that survived a fall from a truck. She lifted it out. It was heavier than a case of empty folders. She set it on the concrete under the west windows where the light was strong, thumbed the latches, unlocked, and opened it. Photographs first, a stack, banded. She slid the band off with her thumb. Pores. Dozens of them, dated, floor numbered, and in every frame the same wrongness she'd just felt through her boot. Concrete going into forms in a color no structural mix ever wore, thin and pale. Trucks with a logo she photographed before she let herself read it. Timestamps in the corner. 9 a.m. light in most of them, long shadows, a specific slant she filed away without knowing why. Under the photographs, invoices. She fanned them. Full density mix, billed. Low density mix, delivered. The gap between the two numbers, repeated across 40 pages, was a number with too many zeros to be an accident. Under the invoices, lab reports, core samples, passing grades in clean type, stamped and signed, for concrete she had just heard ring hollow under her own hand, falsified. Every one. She fanned them slower. Floor after floor, the same pattern. A lab she'd never heard of certifying strength that wasn't there. A sequence of approvals that ran up through the firm like a staircase. She didn't stop to read every signature. She would later, and she would wish she hadn't. For now the volume alone did the talking. This was not one bad pour. This was a system, patient and funded, running for the better part of a year, under a firm whose name was on her paycheck. And under the lab reports, at the bottom, where a person hides the thing they're most afraid of, deeds. She lifted them out one at a time. Property deeds. Not for the tower, for low-rise buildings across 3 boroughs, addresses she half recognized, the kind of addresses that held 400 families to a block, affordable housing, rent stabilized. Deeds transferring the land out from under them into a chain of holding companies, each company a name that meant nothing, each name feeding upward into 2 names that meant everything. She read the first parent company, she read the second. Her hands stopped. She was crouched on a sealed floor 61 stories up, alone, holding proof that the tower she was here to certify was built on a lie, and that the lie paid for itself by evicting the people the city was supposed to protect, and her name was 1 signature away from the top of it. She photographed everything, every photograph, every invoice, every report, every deed, laid flat under the west sun, her hands moving faster than her breathing. She shot the case, she shot the cavity. She shot the moved wall and the hollow floor a second time with the case in frame. Then she sat back on her heels and took out her phone to call the one person she was contractually required to call before she filed a structural finding on a firm project. Martin Voss. Her thumb hovered. Some part of her, the part that had counted 12 seconds in his office, the part that had watched him stay seated, told her not to, told her the badge was cleared before she said yes. Told her a case like this doesn't get sealed into a wall by a stranger. She told that part it was tired. The protocol was the protocol. A finding this size, unreported up the chain before she acted, and Voss and Hart could bury her for going around them. Insubordination, breach, license review. If she was going to burn the tower down, she had to do it clean, on the record, with the call logged. That was careful. That was the only armor she had. She looked at the deeds one more time before she dialed. 400 families to a block, the addresses had said. She thought about a walk-up in the Bronx, and a mother who'd kept a lease taped inside a kitchen cabinet like a relic, and a landlord who'd learned the buildings were worth more empty. She had crawled out of that arithmetic. These deeds were the same arithmetic, run by better suits, hidden in a wall 61 floors above the people it erased. Whatever this cost her, she was not going to be the signature that made it legal. She called. He answered on the second ring. Adrian, you're up there. Martin. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. I need you to listen and not talk until I'm done. A pause. Go ahead. 61 is not a clean shell. The floor is low density under the west windows, off the poor spec. There's a partition moved 41 centimeters off grid. Behind it there's a cavity, and in the cavity there's a case. She kept her eyes on the documents fanned across the concrete. Photographs of non-spec pours. Invoices billing full density for low. Lab reports falsified across at least a dozen floors. And deeds. Voss, there are deeds in here. Affordable housing. 3 boroughs. Transferred into holding companies. She breathed. I've photographed all of it. I'm not signing anything. I'm calling it in, and then I'm calling the city. The silence on the line went on too long. When Voss spoke, his voice had changed. The client's smile was gone from it. Something flatter had come up underneath. Something that had been there the whole time. You opened the wall, he said. Not a question. I opened the wall. You broke a city seal on a sealed floor, alone, on a single official exemption cleared to your badge and your name. A pause. She heard, faintly, a chair take a man's weight. Do you understand what that looks like, Adrian? A certified official, alone, on an interdicted floor she demanded access to, found tearing out finished walls, in possession of documents that have been missing from this firm's records for 8 months? The floor tilted under her, though it didn't move. You put those documents there, she said. I didn't put anything anywhere. I'm at my desk. There are 4 people who'll say so. His voice dropped, almost gentle, and the gentleness was the worst of it. You, on the other hand, are exactly where the record says you shouldn't be, holding exactly what a person builds a case around. I gave you a release to sign, a simple release, and instead you went hunting. You knew what was up here. She was on her feet now. You cleared the badge before I agreed. You sent me up here to sign a preliminary, which you refused. A soft sound, almost a laugh. You're a very careful woman, Miss Cole. You'll want to think, right now, very carefully, about how the next hour goes. There are deeds in this case, Martin. Families. This isn't a bad pour you can paper over. There's a floor you broke into, and a case in your hands with your prints all over it. His voice never rose. That was the thing she'd remember, how it never rose. You keep saying, families. Like the word is a shield. It isn't. It's a motive. A careful official, passed over, alone on a sealed floor, sitting on documents worth a fortune. That's not a whistleblower, Adrian. From the outside, that's a thief who got caught choosing sides. I photographed everything. To what device? On what network? A pause. And in the pause, she understood he already knew the answer. Think about where those photographs live right now. Think about whether they'll still be there tonight. Her stomach dropped to floor. She heard the change in the building before she understood it. The service elevator, far off, waking, cables beginning to run. Coming up. I'm calling the city, she said, and pulled the phone from her ear to do it. The screen showed 1 bar, then none. The signal died between her hand and her thumb. 61 stories of steel and glass and something else. Something switched. The floor's repeaters, killed from below. No signal. She looked at the sealed door she'd come through, at the case open on the concrete, at the city hanging gold and useless behind the glass. The elevator cables ran in the walls. Someone was coming up to a floor where she was alone, off the record, standing over the proof. She moved before she'd finished deciding to. She swept the documents together, squared them, and did the one thing Voss hadn't accounted for. She took the smallest of the deeds, a single folded page from the bottom of the stack, and slid it flat into the zippered inside pocket of the portfolio, behind the badge, where a hand patting a case down would never think to look. 1 page. Insurance. If they took everything else, they would not know they'd missed it. Then she snapped the case shut on the rest, because a woman carrying nothing looked guilty, and a woman carrying the case looked like she had somewhere to be. The cables ran faster now, close, the car climbing the last floors toward 60. She counted the seconds she had left and found there were not many of them. The sealed stairwell was the only way down that wasn't the elevator, and the elevator was the thing coming up. She killed the display on her dead phone, gripped the case, and ran for the stairs. The stairwell door hit the wall and swung back at her. Adrian caught it with her shoulder, spun through, and took the last flight down to the 60th 2 steps at a time. The clutch of the case bit into her fingers. She hit the 60th floor landing and stopped. The service elevator was there. Its indicator light glowed steady above the doors, parked on 60, not 61. Empty car, doors open. Nobody in it. She stared at the empty box. Somebody had sent it up and gotten off. Somebody was already on the floor with her. She did not take the elevator. She crossed the corridor toward the tenant fit-out on the north side, the half-built office suite she'd walked through in her first month here, back when the 60th was just another cleared floor, and the crown above it was somebody else's problem. Glass partitions. A reception desk still wrapped in plastic. Behind it, a small interior room with no windows, meant for server racks. She'd logged it herself. A door that locked. Footsteps came off the stairwell above her, unhurried. A man who knew the building and knew she had nowhere to be. Adrian slipped behind the plastic-wrapped desk and into the server room and pushed the door until the latch caught. She pressed her back to the wall beside it and held her breath until her pulse stopped filling her ears. The footsteps reached the 60th. They crossed the corridor. They passed the glass. They stopped. A hand tried the door handle. Once, twice, harder. The frame shuddered. Then a shoulder hit it, and the cheap latch drove sideways into the strike plate and jammed there, metal folding into metal, and the door held. Not because it was strong, but because it was now broken shut. She heard the man swear low. He hit it again. The frame flexed and did not give. Ms. Cole, Voss's voice, but not Voss. Younger, a worker's flatness. Come out. This is easier if you come out. She said nothing. She looked at the door and understood it would open eventually, or it would never open, and either way she was on the wrong side of it. She pulled her phone from her jacket. Dead bars where the signal used to be. She dialed 911 anyway, and got the 3-tone whine of a call refused. The repeaters were still down. Whoever had killed the floor's signal had left the killing in place. Another hit on the door. A screwdriver now, worked into the gap, prying. Adrian moved to the far corner, crouched below the empty rack rails, and looked at the phone again. One thing had changed. In the corner, a single bar, weak, flickering. The server room shared a wall with the building's north face, and the north face looked across the avenue, and somewhere out there a tower she'd barely glanced at that morning was throwing enough of a signal to leak through the concrete. One bar. She'd get one call, maybe. She would not get a second. Her thumb went to the keypad. 9. 1. 1. The screwdriver shrieked against the strike plate. Her hand jumped. The last digit smeared under her thumb. She felt it land wrong, felt it become a number that was not a 1. And the phone was already dialing before her eyes caught up. 10 digits now, not 3. A full number assembled out of panic and a slipped thumb, and she almost killed it. Almost. The screwdriver bit deeper. The door groaned. She let it ring. Across the avenue, on the 54th floor of a tower still dressed in scaffolding, a phone buzzed against a marble slab. Kang Tae-ho did not look at it. He was standing at the window with his sleeves turned back below the elbows, reading a deed off a tablet a lawyer held for him. One of 11 deeds for 11 units his mother had bought in this building 30 years ago and never sold. The lawyer was explaining a lien. Tae-ho had stopped listening 2 liens ago. The phone buzzed again, walked a centimeter across the stone. Park Dae-hyun picked it up before it could fall. He read the screen. No caller ID, local. Let it go. It's the 3rd time. Dae-hyun frowned. Same number, 10 seconds apart. Tae-ho held out his hand without turning from the glass. Dae-hyun set the phone in it. He answered because his mother's affairs were a mess of unknown numbers, and he had learned, this week, to answer all of them. He put it to his ear and said nothing, which was how he answered every call he did not expect. He heard breathing, fast, controlled by force. Then a woman's voice, very low, very close to the mouthpiece. Please don't hang up. Not a wrong number. Wrong numbers apologized. This one bargained. Who is this? He said. A pause on her end, the smallest recalculation. She'd expected a service. She'd gotten a man. I don't know who you are, she said. I dialed wrong. I know that. Please. I need you to not hang up for 10 seconds. Behind her voice, he heard a sound he knew. Metal working metal. Someone forcing a door. Where are you? He said. Halston Tower. Her breath caught on the name. 60th floor, north side. There's a man trying to get through a door and I can't call out. The signal's down on the whole floor. I've got one bar and it's you. It's just you, so please. Stop. He said it flat and she stopped. He turned from the window. Across the avenue, close enough to read the crane numbers, Halston Tower stood with its interdicted crown dark against the morning. He'd been looking at it all week without seeing it. Say the floor again. 60. The tenant fit out on the north face. Server room behind the reception build-out. The doors jammed shut, which is the only reason he hasn't. A bang. She flinched. He heard it in the line. Hasn't gotten in yet. Daehyun was already watching his face. Taeho covered the mouthpiece. Halston. North stack. Who do we have inside? Nobody, Daehyun said. It's not ours. Whose is it? Daehyun's jaw shifted. Voss and Hart hold the inspection contract. The crown's the piece your uncle's been. I know what my uncle's been. Taeho uncovered the phone. How many ways off that floor? The woman answered like someone reading an exit map she'd memorized without knowing why. 2 stairwells and the service car. He came up the service car. He's between me and the north stair. The south stair's clear, but it puts me on the wrong side of the whole floor to reach it, and he'll hear the door. Then you don't run yet. He was already moving, crossing the marble, Daehyun a step behind. You listen to me. What's your name? The pause again. She measured what a name cost. Adrian. Adrian, I'm 9 minutes from you. Less if the avenue's kind. He hit the stairwell of his own building, the 54th, and started down. Where in the room are you? Back corner, below the rack rails. Is there anything in there? Anything heavy? Anything with an edge? A silence that was her looking. Rack rails. Steel. Bolted. And a torque bar somebody left. On the floor. Pick it up. He heard her move. Heard fabric drag concrete. Heard her breath change the way breath changes when a hand closes around a weapon and the body decides it might not die kneeling. I have it, she said. Good. Now, the door. Tell me exactly what he's doing to it. The line filled with the sound for 3 full seconds while she held the phone toward it. Screwdriver in the strike gap. Prying, not cutting. Taeho knew that door and that lock and that method because he had ordered doors opened that way and had ordered them stopped. He's working the strike, not the hinges, he said. That's slow. That door'll hold longer than he wants it to. You have more time than it feels like. Are you hearing me? I'm hearing you. Her voice cracked once and came back level. It doesn't feel like time. It never does. He took the stairs 3 at a time, one hand on the rail, the phone hot against his ear. Above him, Daehyun spoke into his own phone in Korean. Fast. 2 words she wouldn't have caught even if the signal carried them. The car, the avenue, now. Adrian, why is a man forcing a door to get to you? What did you find? The line went quiet in a different way. Not fear, calculation. She was deciding how much of her own grave to hand a stranger. I'm an inspector, she said finally. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. I called the man I report to and he told me I'd made a mistake coming here. And then the elevator started moving, and now there's a man at my door. Each sentence set down like a stone she was done carrying alone. That's what I know. That's all I know. That's enough. It was more than enough. It was a shape he recognized from the inside, the same shape as the 11 deeds and the liens and the crown gone dark. And he did not tell her that. Stay in the corner. Keep the bar. Don't open that door for anyone who isn't standing in front of you saying my name. I don't know your name. He reached the lobby of his own tower and pushed into the morning. The avenue opened in front of him, 4 lanes and a median, and the black car already nosing to the curb with Daehyun holding the door. You will, he said, and got in. The car cut the avenue on a yellow. Taeho kept the phone to his ear the whole way and kept her talking, because a voice that talks does not panic all the way down. and he needed her still able to move when he arrived. "Talk to me," he said. The man at the door. One set of footsteps or two. She listened. One. He came alone. Voss sent a laborer, not a crew. He's improvising. He watched the tower grow in the windshield. That means nobody upstairs planned for you to run. Good. Improvised men make mistakes. Is he still on the strike plate? He stopped. Her whisper dropped. He stopped. Why did he stop? Because he's thinking. Let him think. What's he doing now? The line breathed. Then, faint through concrete and one weak bar, a voice on her side, the laborer's, calling her name through the door. Then a second sound. A phone. He was calling someone, calling up the chain, asking what to do about a door that wouldn't open and a woman who wouldn't answer. He's on the phone, she said. He's asking someone. Then he's not deciding for himself, and the person deciding for him is not in the room. And that is the best news you've had this morning. The car swung off the avenue onto Halston's approach. I'm at your building, Adrian. I'm at your building. Stay down. You're... Something broke and reset in her voice. You're actually here. I said 9 minutes. It's been 6. He crossed the plaza. Now the part you won't like. When I come through that door, I'm going to look like the last man you want walking toward you. Big, fast, tattooed. You're going to feel your body tell you to swing the bar. Don't. Not until you've heard my voice say your name in the room, not the phone. Understand me? A beat. Why would I swing at the man who came to help? Because your body doesn't know the difference yet, he said. Mine's the same. Trust comes after. Survival comes first. He heard her swallow. Heard, under it, the laborer's phone voice rise again through the door, arguing with someone up the chain. Whoever he was calling had stopped answering clean and started answering angry. He's getting told off, Adrian whispered. He keeps saying she won't, and I can't, and now he's not saying anything. He's just listening. Good. A man being yelled at over a phone isn't watching the corridor. Tejo reached the lobby doors. Front stack's yours, service car's his, so I take the south stair he isn't watching. He was out of the car before it fully stopped. Tejo peeling toward the loading dock. Tejo crossing the plaza with his phone still live. A security guard rose from the lobby desk and got a look at his face and sat back down. Keep the line open. Put the phone in your pocket. Screen to your leg. Don't hang up. If I lose your voice, I still have your floor. He took the south fire stair and went up. 60 floors is a long climb, and he did not climb 60. The fit-out was on the north side of a floor. He reached in under 4 minutes at a pace that would have folded most men. Chest heaving, jaw set, saying nothing into the phone now, because talking cost air he needed for stairs. At the 60th landing he stopped, eased the fire door, listened. The floor was quiet in the way a floor is quiet when one man is standing very still deciding whether to break a lock or wait for orders. Tejo went through the glass fit-out on the balls of his feet, past the plastic-wrapped desk, and saw him. A man in work clothes crouched at a jammed door with a screwdriver in one hand and a phone pinned to his shoulder, mid-sentence, saying, "She won't come out and the door's shut. What do you want me to—" He never finished it. Tejo took the phone off his shoulder first, because a man reporting is a man with witnesses, and dropped it face down on the concrete under his boot. The laborer came up and around with the screwdriver, and Tejo caught the wrist, turned it until the tool rang on the floor, and put the man against the glass partition hard enough to bow it without breaking it. "Who sent you?" Tejo said, in English, close. The man's eyes did the math on the size of the hand on his chest, and the phoenix inked up the right side of the neck above him, and something in his face gave out. "I just opened doors," he said. "I opened doors, man. They told me open the door, that's all, I swear." "Whose door?" "The firm, the suit, Voss." The name came out of him like a tooth. "He said a woman broke a seal and I gotta hold her till they figure it out. That's it. That's all I got." Tejo looked at him a moment longer. Then he stepped back and let go, and the laborer slid down the glass and stayed there, hands open on the floor. Not worth the breath. Voss's throwaway, and everyone in the corridor knew it now, including the man himself. "The stairs," Tejo said. "Down. Don't stop at 40. Don't tell Voss you saw my face. He'll figure it out fast enough. and you don't want to be standing next to him when he does." The laborer went. His footsteps fell down the north stair and kept falling. Tae-ho picked the man's phone off the concrete and turned it over. The call was still connected. He put it to his ear and heard, thin and furious, a voice he'd have known anywhere, not Voss, higher up than Voss, a voice that spoke English with the same clipped patience his uncle used when a plan slipped a gear. It said, "Is it done? Tell me it's done," and Tae-ho held the phone and said nothing, and let the silence tell the man on the other end that something had gone very wrong with his morning. Then he ended the call and put the phone in his pocket. Evidence now, not garbage. He stood a moment in the corridor and made himself breathe slow. His hands wanted work. He'd crossed an avenue on a stranger's panic, and part of him had expected a mistake, a wrong floor, a woman who'd dialed a scam and gotten lucky. Instead, he'd found a real door, a real man, and his own 3 companies about to be read back to him like an indictment. The pieces were landing too clean. Somebody had built this to be found. He just didn't yet know by whom, or against which of them. Tae-ho crossed to the jammed door and set his hand flat against it. "Adrian," he said at once, level. "It's the man from the phone. 9 minutes. It's me. I'm alone in the corridor, and the one who was here is gone down the stairs. You can look through the gap if you want to see before you believe." Silence on the other side, then a small scrape, her at the door, an eye at the pried gap where the screwdriver had chewed the strike open half a centimeter. He stood back from it so she could see all of him, hands loose, no one behind him. "You said don't open it for anyone not saying your name," her voice came, muffled. "You never said your name." Something moved at the corner of his mouth that on another man might have been a smile. "Kang," he said. "Kang Tae-ho." The gap went still. He heard nothing for a second, and then he heard something worse than nothing, a slow breath drawn in, held, and let out through the door like the air going out of a decision she'd already made. "Say it again," she said. Her voice had changed, the panic was gone from it, and what replaced the panic was colder and more careful, the voice of someone reading a name off a page they were only now understanding. "Kang Tae-ho." "Kang," she repeated, flat. "Iron Phoenix, your company, your holdings." A pause that stretched. "I'm going to say some names to you and you're going to tell me if they're yours. Seijin Holdings, Han River Property Partners, Iron Phoenix Urban." Every one of them was his. 2 of them he'd founded himself. The third his uncle ran. "Where are you hearing those names?" Tae-ho said, and for the first time that morning something in his own voice went careful. "They're in a folder," Adrian said, from behind a broken door, with a torque bar still in her fist, and a deed folded in the zip pocket over her heart. "They're on transfer papers for 400 families worth of rent-stabilized buildings that got signed over to holding companies that climb up to 2 names. And one of the names I couldn't read this morning, but I can read the other one now. I'm looking at it. It's yours." Tae-ho stood in the corridor of a building his uncle's people had rigged to fall and listened to a woman he'd crossed an avenue to save tell him he was the man she'd been running from all along. He looked at the door. The cheap lock folded sideways into its strike, the whole thing wedged shut by the very man he'd just sent down the stairs. "Then we have a problem," he said, "because I've never seen that folder in my life, and I want to see it more than you want to keep it." He set his shoulder against the frame and felt the ruined latch. "I'm going to open this door, not to reach you, to stand where you can see my hands while you decide whether I'm lying. Move back from it." A long silence, then the scrape of her stepping away, and the small definite sound of a woman setting her feet and raising a steel bar to shoulder height, ready, in case the man on the other side was exactly what the papers said he was. "Back," she said. "I'm back, and I'm not putting this down. I'd think less of you if you did." He measured the door once, the ruined strike, the flex of the frame. Then he drove his boot into the lock in a single flat kick, and the compromised latch that had held out a laborer's screwdriver for 20 minutes tore out of the wood all at once, and the door swung in on a black shell floor and a woman in green and ivory standing braced in the far corner with a torque bar up and a stranger's name on her lips. They looked at each other across the empty room. She saw the phoenix on his neck. He saw the folder under her arm. Neither of them moved toward the other. The morning light came through the west windows at a low slant and laid a long stripe across the floor between them, across the very stretch of low-density poor she'd sounded out with her heel 3 hours ago. He stood on one side of that stripe, she stood on the other, neither crossed it. Her chest was still heaving. The bar in her hand had a fine tremor in it she was working to still. He watched her do it, watched her drag her own breathing back down by force, the same trick he'd talked her through on the stairs, and he understood without being told that she'd been doing it long before he called, that this was a woman who had taught herself to be calm on purpose, because nothing had ever handed it to her. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you," he said. "I expected a scared woman. I got one who mapped her own exits and picked up a weapon." "Don't." Her jaw set. "Don't tell me what I am. Men who tell me what I am are usually about to take something." "Adrian Cole," he said. He did not step over the threshold. He stayed in the broken doorway with his hands open at his sides, the wrecked latch on the floor between his boots. "You're going to keep that bar up as long as you need to. And you're going to keep that folder. I won't ask you for it. But I'm going to tell you 3 things, and then you decide." She didn't lower the bar. Her eyes went from his face to his neck to his hands and back, cataloging, the way she cataloged a wall she suspected was hollow. 1. He lifted a single finger. "The man who put you behind that door works for Martin Voss. He told me so with your name in his mouth before I sent him downstairs." 2. A second finger. "The building I came out of this morning is across that avenue, and it's my mother's, and I've spent this week finding out that 11 units she bought 30 years ago are strangled with liens I didn't put there. Same as your 400 families. Somebody's been moving property under Korean names, and one of those names is mine, and I didn't sign for it." The bar came down 2 inches. "Not from trust, from arithmetic." 3. He lowered his hand. "You said the papers climbed to 2 names. You can read mine now. You couldn't read the other one this morning." He held her eyes. "When you can read the other one, you're going to wish you'd never learned to read, because I already know whose it is. And he's the reason this floor is built to fall, Miss Cole, not to catch you, to bury both of us under the same roof and let the city read the wreckage however he writes it." The torque bar hung at her side now, not dropped, lowered. "Who?" she said. Tejo looked past her, out the west windows where the low-density poor sat curing under a floor that was never meant to hold, and then back at her. "Family," he said, "the worst kind, the kind that signs your name for you." Far below them, 60 floors down, a black sedan idled at the loading dock, and across the avenue Martin Voss stood at a 40th floor window with a phone to his ear that no one was answering, watching the crown of Halston Tower and waiting to hear that a problem had been solved, not knowing it had just walked out of a server room into the worst company he could have imagined, and turned, and started reading his name off the wall. The elevator came back up while they were still standing in the doorway, and this time it did not stop at the 60th floor. Adrian heard the cables shudder past. She turned toward the sound. Tejo lifted one hand, a small motion, palm flat, and she understood it without a word. "Wait. Listen." The car climbed to the crown and settled, and the doors rolled open 2 flights above them. Voices. English and Korean, layered, unhurried. Men who believed the building belonged to them. "That's not one man," she whispered. "No," Tejo said. "That's cleanup." He crossed to the north wall in 4 steps and looked down at the loading dock through the seam of glass. His jaw moved once. Then he had his own phone out, thumb already moving, and he spoke 3 words in Korean so fast she caught only the shape of a name. Daehyun. She stood in the middle of a room built to collapse and made a decision. She would not run again. Running had put her in a locked closet with 1 bar of signal. She bent, set the torque bar on the floor without a sound, and drew the black folder tighter under her arm. "Stairs," Tejo said. "South, now." They went down, not toward the lobby. He stopped her on the 54th landing with a hand that never touched her, just filled the space where her next step wanted to go. A door there stood propped with a fire extinguisher, and through it was the sky bridge she had never used, the enclosed glass tube that ran from Halston across the avenue into his mother's building. He'd left it propped himself 6 minutes ago, coming the other way. "They watch the street," he said. "They don't watch the air." She looked at the tube. 60 feet of glass, over 4 lanes of traffic. "After you," he said. She went. He came behind, and the fire extinguisher fell, and the door swung shut, and the crown of Halston Tower kept its 2 men and its collapsing floor, and did not know yet that the woman who could name it had walked out over the street. On the far side, in a service corridor that smelled of fresh drywall, Park Dae-hyun was waiting with the sedan pulled inside the loading bay and the engine running. He looked at Adrian, then at the folder, then at Tae-ho, and said one word in Korean. Tae-ho answered with 2. Dae-hyun opened the rear door. She did not get in. "I'm not going anywhere in a car I don't know," she said, "with people whose names are on the papers that end my career." Dae-hyun's face did nothing. Tae-ho almost smiled. "Fair," he said. "Then walk. Public sidewalk, north side, cameras every 30 feet. We'll follow at the curb. You keep the folder, you keep your phone, and when you decide you'd rather sit down, the door's open." She walked. They followed, and for 11 blocks in the ordinary morning, Adrian Cole moved through the city with a mafia boss's car idling at her shoulder, and it was the safest she had felt since 8:04. Her phone came back to life on the 4th block. 4 bars, then 5. The messages landed in a stack. Voss, 8:52. Adrian, call the office immediately. Voss, 9:06. This is a serious situation. Do not speak to anyone. An unknown number, 9:15. A single line. We need to talk before you do anything you can't undo. It wasn't signed. She knew the cadence anyway. Margaret typed the way she spoke, in complete sentences that sounded like doors closing. And then the one that stopped her on the corner of the 5th block. Voss and Hart, from the firm's official account. A letter, attached as a PDF, formatted, letter-headed, already stamped with a case number. She read it standing still, while the sedan slid to the curb behind her. Effective immediately, the certification privileges of Adrian Cole are suspended, pending internal review. She had breached a sealed floor. She had entered without proper authorization. She had removed materials from a municipal site. Her single entry badge, cleared at 08 o'clock, was cited as evidence of her unilateral action. The badge Voss had cleared before she said yes. The badge was hers now, in writing. His name was nowhere in the letter. She read it twice. Then she put the phone in the inside pocket, the one with the zipper, next to the folded deed, and she opened the sedan door herself and got in. Tae-ho watched her buckle the belt. He didn't ask. "He suspended me," she said. "The firm, this morning, before 9:30. They had it written before you found the folder," he said. "I know," her voice was flat. "That's what the timestamp means. Nobody drafts a suspension letter in 20 minutes. They wrote it last night." She looked out the window at the tower shrinking behind them. "They wrote it while I was still deciding whether to be careful." Dae-hyun pulled into traffic. They took her to a place she didn't expect. Not a warehouse, not a penthouse, but a law office on the 11th floor of a plain building near the courthouse. Frosted glass, a name on the door she didn't recognize, and behind the desk a woman in a sage-green suit who stood when they came in and did not smile. "Ms. Cole," the woman said, "Evelyn Brooks. I do professional responsibility defense. Kang Tae-ho's people called me 40 minutes ago. I've read nothing. I've agreed to nothing. And I'll tell you the same thing I'd tell any walk-in. Don't hand me a single piece of paper until you decide you trust me." Adrian stayed standing. "He called you." "He paid a retainer," Evelyn said. "That's not the same as him being my client. You'd be my client. He understands the difference. Do you?" It was the first sentence anyone had said to her all morning that assumed she was still a person with choices. She sat. Evelyn laid a legal pad between them and uncapped a pen. "Start where it went wrong. Not the folder. Before the folder. The first thing that made your neck itch." So Adrian told her, in order. And Evelyn wrote in a small tight hand and stopped her twice for times. And when Adrian got to the suspension letter, Evelyn turned her own laptop around. "It's already filed with the licensing board," Evelyn said. "As of 9:41, which means someone at your firm had the board's after-hours intake portal open and ready." She tapped the screen. "You don't get a case number that fast unless the complaint was drafted and sitting in a draft folder waiting for a send button." "Voss," Adrian said. Voss signed the cover. Evelyn scrolled. But the technical exhibit attached to the complaint, the substantive one, the one that actually damns you, wasn't written by Martin Voss. Voss doesn't know a shear wall from a shower curtain. She turned the laptop the rest of the way. This does. Look at it. Adrian looked. It was a structural assessment. Halston Tower, floor 61, dated 3 weeks ago, the week the city sealed the floor. It certified the disputed pour as full density, compliant, sound. It waved away the very defect she had photographed that morning at 8:31. And it was thorough, fluent, technically flawless, the work of someone who knew exactly which numbers a review board would check, and exactly how to make them land. At the bottom, above the license line, was a signature. Hers. The loops of the A, the flat crossbar she'd used since she was 19, because a supervisor once told her, a fussy signature reads as a fussy inspector. The license number underneath. 7 digits. Her 7 digits. She had never seen this document before in her life. She leaned closer. The forger had gotten the small things right. The way she dropped the pen after the last stroke, so the tail of the number trailed low. The slight lean, left to right. The habit of a woman taught to write fast on a clipboard against her own knee. Whoever made this hadn't guessed at her hand. They had watched it for years. Her hand went to it the way a hand goes to a burn. She pulled it back. That's not mine, she said. I know, Evelyn said quietly. Tell me how I prove it. It's not mine. Louder now. Her ears were hot. The room had gone very precise, every edge of it sharp. I have never signed a full density certification on that pour. I flagged that pour this morning. I photographed the defect. I would never. She stopped, made herself stop. Somebody drew my signature. Somebody had samples, Evelyn said. Somebody had a lot of samples. This isn't a tracing. A tracing shakes. This flows. Whoever made it had studied how your hand moves. She set the pen down. Who has 6 years of your signatures, Miss Cole? Adrian didn't answer. She was looking at the crossbar of the A, and she was thinking about a woman in Zurich who signed the final reports, who assembled the sign-off packages, who for 6 years had put Adrian's pages in front of her own and said, in that dry, approving voice, "Clean work, Adrian. You make my job easy." Margaret kept everything. Margaret filed everything. Margaret had a locked flat file in her office labeled by project and by year, and Adrian had helped her load it more than once. Whole spans of certifications, page after page of Adrian's own hand. The board's copy has my signature, Adrian said slowly. How many other documents does it have? Evelyn's face changed. Say that again? If they made one, they made a set. Adrian stood up. She couldn't sit for it. You don't forge a single certificate to frame someone. You build a paper history. You make it look like I've been signing off on that floor for months, so that when I finally come running to the city yelling fraud, the record shows the fraud is mine. She turned. How much of that floor has my name on it now? That, Evelyn said, is the right question, and I don't have the answer because the firm controls the archive. I can get into the archive. You're suspended. Your badge is not Halston's archive. Adrian looked at her. The firm's. Voss and Hart keep a physical set. Vellum originals, flat files, 14th floor. My keycard still opens the door until someone in IT gets around to killing it, and this morning IT is very busy pretending I burgled a skyscraper. Across the room, by the window, Tejo had not said a word since they walked in. He said one now. No. Adrian turned. Excuse me? You walk back into that building today, he said, and you don't walk out. They wrote a letter that calls you a thief. The next thing they write calls you a thief who returned to the scene. He came off the window. That's not caution, that's the trap. It's the same trap as this morning, wearing a suit. So I sit here, she said, and let them fill a filing cabinet with my forged name. You send someone the letter can't touch. The room held still. He's right, Evelyn said, and Adrian heard how much it cost her to agree with him. You're the one person who cannot be seen near that archive between now and the hearing. Everyone else in this room can. I'm not sending strangers to— Then send me, Evelyn said, with a record subpoena and a witness. Today. This afternoon. I don't creep in on your keycard in the dark. I walk in the front door at 2 o'clock with a demand for preservation of documents, signed and served, so that the second they shred a single page it's obstruction, and I make them stand there while I say it in front of the receptionist. She was already pulling a form up on the laptop. You want to fight the forgery? We don't steal the evidence back. We make it a crime for them to destroy it. Adrian sat back down slowly. They'll refuse, she said. They'll refuse the copies, Evelyn said. They can't refuse the preservation notice. And when they refuse the copies, that refusal goes in front of the board too, next to a very simple question. Why won't a firm with nothing to hide let the accused see her own signatures? For the first time that morning, something in Adrian's chest unclenched by a single notch. Not hope, something colder and more useful. Traction. Then the phone rang. Not the unknown number. The name. Margaret Hart, calling live, the screen bright with it. Adrian looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the phone and said fast and low, "You can answer. You don't confirm anything. You don't deny anything. You don't say where you are or who you're with. You let her talk. People who call to manage you always tell you what they're afraid of." Adrian answered. She put it on speaker and set it on the desk and said nothing. "Adrian," Margaret's voice filled the room, warm and even, the voice that had reviewed 6 years of her pages. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Are you somewhere safe?" Silence. "I flew back," Margaret said. "I'm at the airport now. I left Zurich the moment Martin called me. This has gotten completely out of hand and I intend to fix it." A pause, precisely weighted. "But I need you to come in so I can help you. You have to be here, in the room, with me, or I can't protect you. Where are you?" Adrian watched the phone. Margaret was supposed to be back Friday. It was Tuesday. She left the moment Martin called. Adrian had called Martin at 8:39. Zurich was 6 hours ahead. To be landing now, Margaret would have had to be moving before dawn, before Adrian ever opened that folder, before there was anything for Martin to call her about. "You booked the flight last night," Adrian said. The line went quiet. "Just for a beat. Long enough. I don't understand what You're at the airport now. Landed. From Zurich. It's not even 11. Adrian's voice stayed level, and level was the hardest thing she had ever done. "You'd have to have left before I found anything. You booked it before there was a reason, unless you already knew the reason." Evelyn's hand came down flat on the desk. "Stop." But Adrian was watching the phone, and Margaret was still on the line, and Margaret, for 1/2 second, made the mistake of not hanging up. "You're upset," Margaret said. The warmth had gone thin. "You're not thinking clearly. You broke a city seal alone, Adrian. Whatever you think you found it in a way that makes it worthless. I'm trying to give you a way back. Take it. A breath. Come in. Bring the folder. Let me see it before anyone else does, and I promise you this ends quietly." There it was. "Bring the folder," Adrian repeated, "so I can help you. You don't know what's in it," Adrian said, "but you want it before anyone else sees it." She leaned toward the phone, and her voice dropped, and it did not shake. "Margaret, how many of my signatures do you have?" The line went dead. Nobody in the room moved. The dial tone hummed, then cut. Evelyn slowly took her hand off the desk. "Well," she said, "you confirmed you have the folder, you confirmed you have it in your possession, and you told a hostile party you're onto the forgery, which is 3 things I specifically told you not to do." She capped her pen. It was also the most useful 90 seconds of this case. She booked before the fire started. That's not a defense of you. That's a confession of her. "She's coming here," Tejo said. He was watching the street through the frosted glass, a shape below the shape of the window. "Not here. To wherever she thinks Adrian is. She'll call Voss. Voss will call the board and move up the review." He turned. "How fast can they force a hearing? On an emergency suspension?" Evelyn was already typing. "They can convene a preliminary panel in 72 hours. If they want you gone before you organize a defense, they'll want it fast." She looked up. "Which means we want it faster. We want the hearing before they finish building the fake archive, not after." "You want to rush toward the thing that ends me," Adrian said. "I want to reach it while they're not ready," Evelyn said. "Right now they have a forged certificate and a suspension letter and a story. They don't yet have the mountain of forged history they're planning to bury you under, because they didn't expect you to still be walking around free with the original folder at 11 a.m. We move now, we catch them half-built." Adrian pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. The morning sat on her like a floor. An hour ago, she had been an inspector, the youngest the firm ever certified. 8 months on a tower she'd walked floor by floor, and DARs 8 through 50 clean under her own hand. Now there was a document with her signature swearing a lie she'd caught herself, filed with the board that held her license, and a woman she'd trusted for 6 years had just hung up rather than answer how many more there were. She thought about the walk-up in the Bronx, about being 19 and told her signature was too fussy, about every year since spent making her name mean something an inspector could stake a building on. They had taken the name and signed it to the exact thing she'd spent her whole career refusing to do. "Okay," she said. Evelyn looked up. "File it." Adrian's hand went to the inside pocket, the zipper, and stopped there, resting over the folded deed she hadn't shown anyone yet. The preservation notice, the demand for the archive, all of it. Today, front door, 2 o'clock, and you make them refuse it in front of the receptionist like you said. She met Evelyn's eyes. And subpoena Margaret Hart's flight record, booking time, not just the flight, the minute she paid. Evelyn wrote it down. "That's agency," she said, almost to herself. "Good." Tejo crossed to the desk. He reached into his jacket and set something on it. A phone, dark, cheap, the screen cracked at one corner. "The man from the door," he said. "This is his. The call was still open when I took it off the floor. There's a voice on it. After Voss, above Voss. English, clipped, patient." He looked at Adrian. "You couldn't read the second name off the wall this morning. You didn't have to. It called this phone and asked if it was done." Evelyn stared at the cracked screen. "Is it still recorded?" Tejo said. "From the moment I picked it up." "Then don't touch it again." Evelyn produced a plastic bag from a drawer, the practiced motion of a woman who documents everything, and let him drop it in without a hand on the glass. "Chain of custody starts now. Who else has heard this voice?" "Me," Tejo said, "and him, and whoever it belongs to." "And you know who it belongs to?" Tejo didn't answer that. He looked at Adrian instead, and for a moment the room narrowed to the two of them, the inspector and the man whose companies were on the papers, and the thing that sat unspoken between them was the same thing he'd said on the 60th floor. Family. The worst kind. "You know the name," Adrian said. "You've known since this morning. You could have told the city an hour ago." "If I say the name," Tejo said, "I'm a nephew accusing his uncle over property they both hold. It sounds like a family war. Nobody believes a Kang about a Kang." He nodded at the bagged phone, at the laptop, at the folder under her arm. "It has to come from you, from the record, from a woman with a license and no reason to lie except that they forged her name." His jaw moved. "That's why he built it this way. He needed someone clean to pin it on. He picked the cleanest person in the building." The compliment landed like a sentence. "He picked me," Adrian said, "because my name was worth stealing." "Yes." She stood up. She walked to the window and looked down at the street through the frost. The ordinary traffic. The ordinary city that still thought she was an inspector because it hadn't read its email yet. Somewhere across town, Margaret was landing with a story, and Voss was drafting the next page of it, and above both of them a clipped patient voice was asking whether it was done. It was not done. 2 o'clock, she said, without turning. "File it at 2 o'clock and make them say no on the record." Behind her, Evelyn Brooks began to type, and Park Dae-hyun stepped out to move the car, and Kang Tae-ho stood in the middle of the room with his arms folded, watching the woman at the window decide, for the first time since 8:04 that morning, exactly where the next blow was going to land, and this time, she was the one throwing it. Then Evelyn's screen chimed. She read it. Her hands stopped over the keys. "They moved it," she said. Adrian turned. "The board." Evelyn's voice had gone careful. "There's already a hearing on the calendar. Emergency review, coal license." They didn't wait for 72 hours. She looked up, and for the first time the lawyer's composure had a crack in it. "It's set for tomorrow, 9 a.m., and the exhibit list is attached." She scrolled and stopped. "Adrian, it's not one forged certificate." Adrian came to the desk. The exhibit list ran 2 pages, certification after certification. Halston Tower, floor by floor, month by month. Each one full density, compliant, sound. Each one dated. Each one, the list said, bearing the signature and license number of Adrian Cole. 41 documents. She counted them twice. 41 times her name swore the building was safe. 41 times, above her 7 digits, the flat crossbar of an A she had drawn since she was 19 certified the exact lie she had come to the tower to stop. Some of these dates, she said. Her finger moved down the list and stopped. I was in Albany that week. A conference. 200 miles away. There's a photo of me on a panel. She looked up. I couldn't have signed anything on the 61st floor. I wasn't in the city. Evelyn's pen moved fast. Then, that's the crack. Every date you can put yourself somewhere else is a document that forges itself. Give me alibis. Flights, hotels, receipts, anything with a timestamp that isn't theirs. They didn't check the dates, Adrian said, and something in her voice had turned to iron. They built 41 lies and they got greedy and they didn't check whether I could have been in the room. That's the mistake, not the handwriting, the calendar. Evelyn almost smiled. Now you're defending yourself like a person who plans to win. The archive she'd meant to protect at 2 o'clock was already built. It had been built for months. And in the morning, at 9, a board that held her license was going to lay all 41 on a table and ask her to explain her own handwriting. The dial tone hummed in her memory. How many of my signatures do you have? Now she knew the number. Evelyn slid the laptop around so the screen faced Adrian again, and this time she was pointing at a photograph, not a document. You took this one at 8:31, she said. Timestamps in the file data. But look at the shadow. Adrian leaned in. The photo showed the disputed pour under the west windows, the low-density rectangle she'd knelt over that morning. A steel anchor plate, 6 bolts, and across the concrete, a shadow that reached long and thin toward the room's center. That's an 8:30 shadow, Adrian said. Sun still low. Right. Evelyn opened a second image beside it. The forged certification's own attached photo. The exhibit the board would see tomorrow. Same anchor plate. Same 6 bolts. Now this one. The shadow in the second photo fell short, compressed, high. 9 o'clock, Adrian said. Her thumb hovered over the trackpad. Maybe a hair passed. Tejo had been standing at the window with his back to them. He turned. They photographed the same plate twice, Adrian said, slower now. Once at 8:30 for their file, once at 9 to fake mine. But the city sealed that floor 3 weeks ago. Nobody was supposed to be up there at 9 in the morning taking pictures for a report dated 3 weeks back. Somebody was, Evelyn said. Adrian pulled the laptop the rest of the way toward her. She zoomed the second image until the bolt heads filled the screen. 6 of them, and stamped into the crown of each. A small raised code. She counted the characters twice. These aren't spec bolts, she said. Look at the lot stamp. This is a batch mark. Structural fasteners carry a heat number and a supplier lot. That's how you trace a bad run. So trace it, Tejo said. I can't from a photo. But the firm can. The board can subpoena the supplier. She sat back. Whoever ordered these bolts, their purchase order has a name on it. And you don't order 6 anchor bolts. You order a pallet. A lot number that big ties to 1 invoice, 1 buyer, 1 delivery address. Tejo crossed the room and set his phone on the table. He'd already been dialing. Say the number out loud. She read the stamp off the screen, character by character. He typed it into a message and sent it without explaining who to. Daehyun's people pull permits and freight manifests for a living, he said. It's how we found out what the liens on my mother's building were secured against. He looked at the photo of the shadow, then at Adrian. You want the second name. That's the thread that pulls it. I want it from the paper, Adrian said. Not from your mouth. I know. Evelyn's phone buzzed against the table. She read it, and her jaw set. My associate served the preservation notice at Voss and Hart 8 minutes ago. Front desk. 2 o'clock, like I said, except I moved it up. She kept reading. They refused the copies. In writing. The receptionist logged the refusal in the visitor system, and my associate has a time-stamped photo of the screen. That's good? Adrian asked. That's them destroying their own alibi. Evelyn set the phone down. An innocent firm hands you the file and lets you disprove yourself. A guilty one bars the door. The board reads a refusal exactly one way. The next hour moved without anyone deciding it should. Daehyun called back. Taeho took it on speaker in Korean, then switched to English mid-sentence, watching Adrian's face. The Bolt lot, he said. One purchase order. Supplier in Newark. Delivery routed to a job trailer registered to a Shell. Iron Phoenix Urban. Adrian's hand went flat on the table. That's your company. It's the one my uncle runs. He didn't blink. I founded two. He kept the third and I let him, because it held my mother's building, and I thought that meant it was safe with family. A muscle moved in his jaw. The bolts that were built to fail were bought under the company my uncle controls, delivered to a trailer parked across the avenue, at the tower where he was strangling her deed with liens I never signed. Kang Sang-wook, Adrian said. It was the first time either of them had said the whole name in the room. Taeho let it sit there. Now you read it, he said quietly. Not from me. From a freight manifest with his signature on the receiving line. Evelyn was already typing. I can have that manifest certified and entered by morning. Freight records aren't privileged. She glanced up. But a purchase order and a shadow don't convict a man. They put his name in the room. You still have to explain why a builder would spend money to construct a floor that falls. Adrian pulled the deed out of her inner pocket. She'd carried it since 8:39 that morning, folded behind her badge, behind the zipper, and she had not shown it to anyone. Not Evelyn, not Taeho. She unfolded it now on the table and smoothed the crease with 2 fingers. Because the floor falling was never the point, she said. It was the cover. Taeho's eyes dropped to the paper and stayed. I took one deed out of the folder before I ran, Adrian said. Insurance. I didn't tell either of you because I didn't know which of you I could hand it to. She turned it so they could both read the header. This is one of the 400 families, a rent-stabilized building, 3 boroughs over, transferred through a holding chain, and the chain terminates in 2 names. I read the first this morning. She looked at Taeho. It's yours. Han River Property Partners. Used without me, he said. I believe you now. She slid her finger down the page to the second grantee line, the one she had not let herself read on the sidewalk, the one she'd been carrying folded shut for 3 hours. And here's the second. Evelyn leaned in. Read it. Set her pen down. Kang Sang-wook, Evelyn said. As trustee. Same signature block that receives the bolts. Adrian finally let herself lean back. The tower coming down was insurance fraud and a distraction at the same time. A collapsed crown means an investigation. An investigation means the city freezes every project the firm touched, including the 400 units, tied up in litigation for years, unsellable, until the families give up and the holding chain buys the empty shells for nothing. She tapped the deed. And the inspector whose license certified it all burns with the building, me. That's why they cloned my name onto 41 documents, not to frame me for one bad floor, to make me the paper reason the whole scheme looks legal. A double disaster, Taeho said. One that buries the building. One that buries you under the same roof. Adrian pressed her thumb to the crease in the deed and thought about the badge that had been cleared at 8 before she'd said yes. The elevator that started moving the second she phoned Voss. The repeaters cut from below. None of it had been improvised. Every piece had been set the night before, waiting for her to walk into a sealed floor alone and give them the photograph they needed of a woman breaking a seal with her own name on the badge. They didn't gamble on me finding the folder, she said. They wanted me to find it. A panicked inspector who finds fraud and runs is easier to frame than one who never went up. She looked at the folder. The only thing they didn't plan for was the door jamming shut instead of holding, and a wrong number reaching the one man in the city who'd crossed the avenue. Planned, Evelyn said. She was writing fast now. That's the word that changes the charge. Not negligence. Design. Adrian's phone rang. The number was local, unsaved, and she almost didn't answer. Evelyn nodded once. Take it. Say nothing you don't have to. Adrian put it to her ear. Miss Cole. A man's voice, tired, careful. This is Daniel Ruiz. Municipal Buildings, Structural Division. You listed me as your emergency inspection contact on the Halston filing. Adrian closed her eyes. She'd put his name on a form 8 months ago and never thought about it again. Mr. Ruiz. I got an automated flag this morning that a sealed floor at Halston had its seal broken by a single entry badge under your license. Standard alert. I ignored it. A pause. Then at noon I got a second flag. A demolition permit application for the Halston Crown, filed emergency, citing structural failure. Signed off on an inspection report I've never seen, dated 3 weeks ago, when I was the inspector of record for that district and I never set foot on that floor. Adrian's eyes opened. Say that again? Somebody filed a report in my district that I didn't write, to fast-track a demolition of a floor that's supposedly failing. Ruiz's voice hardened. Ms. Cole, I've been doing this 22 years. Nobody emergency demolishes a crown at 9 a.m. the day after they seal it, unless they want it down before anybody looks. I pulled the file. Your name's on the certification and mine's on the demo. Neither of us signed what they say we signed. Adrian looked at Evelyn, then at Tejo. Mr. Ruiz, are you willing to say that to a licensing board tomorrow at 9? Silence on the line. Then, I already requested the slot. I want to know who put my name on a demolition order. Adrian gave Evelyn the phone. Evelyn stood, walked to the window, and started talking to Ruiz in the flat cadence of someone building an exhibit list. Tejo watched Adrian across the table. You had the deed the whole time. I had one card, she said. I wasn't going to spend it until I knew the table. And now? Now I know the table. She refolded the deed, but she left it on top of the folder this time, in the open. Tomorrow they walk in expecting to try me. 41 documents, my handwriting, a broken seal, and a badge with my name on it. She looked at him. They don't know Ruiz exists. They don't know about the freight manifest. They don't know you have the phone. They don't know I exist, Tejo said. Adrian almost smiled. Sang-wook does. Sang-wook thinks I'm across the avenue reading my dead father's deeds and grieving my mother's building. He picked up his own phone, the operario's cracked one still bagged beside it in Evelyn's plastic. He doesn't know I answered a wrong number this morning. The hearing room was smaller than Adrian expected. 12 chairs, a raised bench with 3 board members, a court reporter, and a long table where the firm's side had arrived first and arranged itself like a wall. Martin Voss in navy, no hard hat here, hands folded. Margaret Hart beside him in cream, back straight, a leather folio squared to the table edge. And behind them, in gray, a man Adrian had never met in person, but recognized from a photo Dae-hyun had pulled at 3 a.m. Silver at the temples, no phoenix on his neck, watching the room the way a landlord watches a building he's decided to sell. Kang Sang-wook had come to watch her burn in person. The board chair opened it. The firm's counsel spoke first, and he was smooth. He laid the 41 certifications on the table like a man dealing cards he'd counted. Broken seal, single entry badge, a young inspector, ambitious, who'd certified a floor she never should have touched, and panicked when it went wrong. He asked for immediate and permanent revocation. Then Evelyn stood. She didn't argue that Adrian was innocent. She said, I'd like to enter the inspector's own photographs, time-stamped, and I'd like the board to compare 2 shadows. She put the 8:30 photo and the 9 o'clock photo side by side on the room's screen. She let the board look. Then she said, the certification the firm is asking you to revoke a license over was photographed 30 minutes after my client's own inspection began, at 9 a.m., on a floor the city sealed 3 weeks earlier. My client was not on that floor at 9. She'd already found the discrepancy and phoned it in at 8:39. The people who forged her certification took a second photograph of the same anchor plate to fake her report, and the sun caught them. Voss's hands stayed folded. Margaret's did not move from the folio. The bolts in that plate, Evelyn continued, carry a lot stamp. She entered the freight manifest, purchased under one order, delivered to a job trailer registered to a company called Iron Phoenix Urban, signed for on the receiving line by a Mr. Kang Sang-wook. The gray man's face did not change. That, Adrian thought, was the tell. A man wrongly named looks confused. This one had already decided not to. And this, Evelyn said, is a certification of demolition for that same floor, filed as an emergency at noon yesterday, under the inspector of record for the district, Mr. Daniel Ruiz. She turned toward the door. Who is present and who did not write it? Ruiz walked in with his badge on a lanyard and his colete refletivo folded over one arm, because he'd come straight from a site. He took the oath standing. He said he'd been the district inspector for Halston for 4 years. He said he had never inspected the crown, never certified it, and never filed a demolition order. He said his signature on the emergency demo had a middle initial he'd stopped using in 2009. Whoever forged me, he said, copied an old sample, same as whoever forged her. He nodded at Adrian. Because they both came out of the same file cabinet. Margaret Hart's hand finally moved. It went to the folio and pressed it flat, as if it might otherwise open on its own. Evelyn saw it. The board subpoenaed Ms. Hart's travel records, she said. Ms. Hart's return from Zurich was scheduled for Friday. She landed yesterday before 11 a.m. The subpoena returned the booking time. She read it into the record. The flight was booked at 11:41 p.m. the night before, 9 hours before my client broke the seal and found the folder. Ms. Hart booked an emergency return to a fire that hadn't started yet. The chair looked at Margaret. Ms. Hart, can you explain the booking time? Margaret opened the folio. Adrian watched her do it, watched the woman who had taught her to square a drawing to a grid, who had let her carry 6 years of her own signatures into a locked flat file. Margaret took out a single sheet and looked at it, and Adrian understood, in the way you understand a wall is load-bearing before it comes down, that Margaret was going to try to hand the sheet up and say it explained everything. I booked the flight, Margaret said, because Martin called me. Voss turned his head. He called at 11:30, Margaret said, to the board, not to him. He told me the coal problem was being handled the next morning, and I should be in the country when it was. Her voice stayed level, which was worse than if it had shaken. I kept the signatures. I copied the hand. I told myself I was protecting the firm's continuity. I was told the floor would be condemned quietly and the certifications would never be tested because no one tests a building that's already coming down. Margaret, Voss said, low. You called me at 11:30, she said, and now she did look at him. It's in the record. Everything is always in the record. She taught me that. She glanced at Adrian once, then away, because she couldn't hold it. The room had gone very still. Sang-wook, in gray, leaned forward and murmured something to the firm's counsel, who stood and asked for a recess. On what grounds? The chair said. My client, the counsel started. You have 2 clients at that table, the chair said, and one of them just testified against the other. That was when Tae-ho stood up in the back of the room. He hadn't been on Evelyn's witness list. He walked to the front the way he'd crossed the avenue that morning, unhurried, and he set the operadio's cracked phone on the table in its plastic bag, and beside it, Evelyn placed the chain of custody sheet. My name is Kang Tae-ho, he said. That man is my uncle. He didn't point. He didn't have to. The whole room had already found the gray man. Yesterday morning I was in the building across the avenue, reading the liens someone placed on my mother's home. 11 units she's owned for 30 years, secured against debts she never took, under the same holding chain on that deed. He nodded at the folder in front of Adrian. A wrong number reached my phone. A woman locked in a room. A man breaking the door. I went. The man who broke the door worked for Martin Voss, and while he forced the lock he was on the phone with someone above Voss, asking if it was done. He set his finger on the bag. This is that call. English. Clipped. Patient. The board can have it authenticated. Sang-wook stood. It was the first time he'd moved. This is a family dispute, he said, and his English was exactly what the operario's phone had recorded. Clipped, patient, certain. My nephew resents. You bought the bolts, Tae-ho said. You received the freight, you signed the deed. You strangled my mother's building to move 400 families into a holding chain, and you built a floor to fall on the one honest inspector left in that firm, so the collapse would look like her mistake, and the litigation would freeze the buildings long enough for you to buy them empty. He said it without heat, which was why it landed. You chose her because her name was clean. A clean name is worth stealing. You told me that when I was 19. You were talking about business. You meant this. For a moment the 2 Kang men stood facing each other across the small room, and Adrian saw the resemblance she was supposed to see and the difference she was supposed to remember. The phoenix on one neck, the bear collar on the other. Sang-wook's counsel tried once more. He said the recording could be a fabrication, the manifest a coincidence, the deed a forgery like the rest. Evelyn let him finish. Then she entered the subpoenaed booking time again, and the freight receiving signature again, and Ruiz's changed middle initial again, and she said the word the chair had already used. 3 separate forgeries, she said, of 3 separate people, all traced to one file cabinet and one purchase order. That's not coincidence. That's a method. And a method has an author. Adrian watched Sang-wook's face while Evelyn spoke, and it stayed exactly as smooth as it had been when he walked in. And that was the thing the board saw too. A man defending his life looks alive. This one looked like he was calculating a resale value and finding it lower than he'd hoped. The chair called the recess herself. When the board returned, it did not read a lesson. It read findings. The certification against Adrian Cole was withdrawn. The 41 documents were referred to the district attorney as forgeries. Martin Voss's professional standing was suspended pending criminal review. Margaret Hart's admission was entered, and her license surrendered on the spot. And the freight manifest, the deed, the demolition forgery, and the recording were transmitted, together, to the office that handles the cases too big for a licensing board, the ones with the word conspiracy in them. Sang-wook left before it finished. Dae-hyun was in the hall. He didn't touch him. He didn't have to. There were 2 men in windbreakers by the elevator who'd been waiting for the manifest to be entered into a public record, and now it had been. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the light was the flat white of afternoon. No shadows to fake anything with. Adrian stood with the folder under her arm and the one deed folded back inside it where it belonged, part of the 400 again instead of her private card. They'll appeal, Evelyn said. Voss will. Sang-wook has lawyers who bill by the hour and by the year. Let them, Adrian said. Every appeal enters more paper. I'm good with paper. Tae-ho came down the steps last. His mother's building would come out of the liens now. The deed chain was evidence, and evidence gets frozen in place, which for once worked in the 11 family's favor and the 400's too. He stopped a step above Adrian. You could stay at the firm, he said. They'll rebuild it. They'll want the one name that came out clean. No. She'd decided it somewhere between the shadow photo and the second grantee line. I'm not going to be the clean name that makes somebody else's building look legal. I'm going to be the name on the door. What door? Cole Urban Preservation. She said it like she'd been saying it for years. The 400 families are going to need somebody who reads the deed chain before they sign anything. Somebody who knows what a 41 document trail looks like from the inside. She looked at him. Somebody who checks the floor herself. 3 months later, there was a door. It came off a hinge at Halston, a fire door from the 60th floor, its lock strike bent sideways in the plate, where a single kick had defeated it. The building's new management would have thrown it in a skip. Adrian bought it for the cost of the hall. It hung now on the wall of a 2-room office 3 blocks from the courthouse, above a small brass plate, and clients asked about it. She told them the short version. A man had kicked it open because a lock built to fail had jammed a woman inside a room where she'd found something she wasn't supposed to find. She told them the door was the first thing anyone had built badly in that whole scheme that had worked in her favor. A cheap lock that jammed shut instead of holding. A cheap lot of bolts stamped with a number the son could read. She did not tell most of them that the man who'd kicked it stopped by on Thursdays, that his mother's 11 units were free and rented at the old rates by court order, that the 400 were being unwound one deed at a time, and her name signed the honest end of each one now, in her own hand, the flat crossbar she'd used since she was 19. Voss took a plea in the spring. Margaret's surrender of her license went uncontested. She'd stopped fighting the day she chose the record over the man who'd called her at 11:30. Sang-wook's lawyers billed by the year, exactly as Evelyn had said, and exactly as Evelyn had said. Every motion they filed entered another page into a public file that grew heavier against him each time. The word conspiracy was in the caption. Adrian read every filing. She was good with paper. Daniel Ruiz sent her a note after the first families moved back in. 2 lines. He'd been ready to retire, he wrote, until somebody put his name on a demolition he never signed. Now he was staying. Somebody had to be the inspector of record who actually walked the floor. She kept the door because a client, early on, had asked her why she'd left a firm with her name almost on it to start over with a broken door on the wall. Adrian had looked at the strike plate, bent sideways, the metal folded where it should have gripped. Because that's the only part of the building, she said, that told the truth. The elevator in Evelyn's building smelled of other people's cologne, and Adrian wrote it down alone. She'd said she wanted the stairs. Evelyn had said no, Cameras on the stairwell were spotty, and tonight of all nights her lawyer wanted her on record, in the light, doing nothing wrong. So she took the elevator. 11 floors. She watched the numbers fall and counted them the way she counted anything now, for evidence. Park Dae-hoon waited at the curb with the sedan. She shook her head at him. He didn't argue. He simply pulled out and rolled along beside her at walking speed while she went east on foot, the black car a slow shadow at her left hand, and neither of them pretended it was anything but a leash she'd agreed to wear. Her phone had gone quiet an hour ago. That was worse than the buzzing. She stopped at a corner and looked at the screen. Nothing new from Voss. Nothing from the unknown number that wrote like Margaret. The last thing there was the suspension letter, the PDF with the case number, and she'd read it enough times that she could see the letterhead when she closed her eyes. A man in a suit brushed past her and she flinched. He didn't look back. She kept walking. Home was a one-bedroom on the 4th floor of a walk-up, the kind she'd sworn she'd leave and never had, because leaving it felt like agreeing she'd been ashamed of it. The stairs still smelled like the downstairs neighbor's cooking. She climbed them the way she'd climbed them at 22, one hand on the rail, and at her own door she stood a moment before she put the key in, listening. Nothing. Just the building breathing. Inside, she locked the deadbolt and the chain, and stood with her back against the door. The apartment looked the way she'd left it that morning. Coffee cup in the sink, bed unmade, a blazer over the chair she'd decided not to wear. It was the last room the old version of her had stood in, the one who thought today was an inspection. That woman had picked out earrings. Adrian looked at the earrings on the dresser and felt something crack quietly behind her ribs. She set the black folder on the kitchen table. She set her phone beside it. She sat. For a long time she didn't do anything. Then she opened her laptop, because sitting was the thing that would kill her, and she typed her own name into the licensing board's public portal the way a stranger would. It was there. Not pending, not under review. There, in the searchable record any client, any firm, any reporter could pull, her 7-digit license number, and beside it, a status flag. Suspended. Under investigation for falsification of structural certifications. The words sat in a gray box like they'd always been there, like they were true. She read them until they stopped being words. She'd built that number out of nothing. She'd taken the exam at an age when the proctor had asked, twice, whether she was in the right room. She'd signed her name, the flat crossbar, the A she'd been making since she was 19, on 8 floors of a tower that stood up straight because she'd made it stand up straight. And now, in the one place the public looked, her name meant liar. She closed the laptop. The click was very loud. The phone lit. Not a call. A news alert. The local kind. The kind she'd set up years ago to track permits and never turned off. Halston Tower. She almost didn't open it. She opened it. A trade site. Fast and thin on facts. A city inspector's certification privileges had been suspended amid an internal review at Voss & Hart of irregularities in the tower's upper floor filings. No name, not yet, but the piece linked the firm, and the firm had a directory, and her photograph sat on that directory under her title, and anyone who wanted a name would have it inside an hour. She set the phone face down. She thought about her mother who was gone, and was glad, and hated being glad, and put both hands flat on the table until the wanting to break something passed through her and out. Then she made herself do the small thing. She got up. She filled the kettle. She stood at the counter while it ticked and heated, and she looked at the folder, and she thought about the 41 documents that were not in that folder, the ones on the board's exhibit list, andar by andar, month by month, every one wearing her hand. Someone had studied her for 6 years to make those. Someone had loved the shape of her signature the way a forger loves a thing he intends to spend. The kettle screamed. She poured. She forgot the cup and let it sit until the steam quit. Her phone buzzed once against the wood. She turned it over. Evelyn. A text, not a call. You home? Adrian typed. Yes. 3 dots. Then, don't read the filings again tonight. You've seen them. Sleep if you can. 8:15 lobby. We go in together. Adrian looked at the words and typed. Okay. And did not mean it, and Evelyn, 200 blocks of experience deep, wrote back. You're going to want to work all night. Work 1 hour. Then stop. That's an order from your council. Adrian almost smiled. Almost. She gave it 1 hour. She spread her own photographs across the table. Her copies. The ones she'd taken at 8:04 and 8:31. The seal, the pour, the long morning shadows. She lined them beside the printout of the forged certificate Evelyn had sent, the one with the 9 a.m. shadow, and she made herself study the difference again, not for the case, but because looking at the true photographs was the only thing in the room that agreed with her. She traced the low-density rectangle under the west windows with one finger. She had been right. That was the thing they couldn't take, even now, even with her name a gray flag in a public box. The floor was hollow where they'd said it was solid. The wall was moved. She had walked into a sealed room, and the room had not lied to her. Every human being attached to this had lied to her. But the concrete had told the truth, and she had heard it, and that was not nothing. It felt, at 11 at night, alone, exactly like nothing. She stood at the window with the cold tea and looked down at the street. The sedan was still there. Daehyun's shape behind the wheel, patient, a man who had waited outside worse doors than hers. She lifted 2 fingers to the glass. She didn't know if he saw. The car didn't move. Somewhere south of her, in a building she'd walked out of that afternoon and might never legally re-enter, was a flat file with 6 years of her signatures in it, and the woman who kept the key to that file had reserved a flight home before the fire she was fleeing had started. Adrian pressed her forehead to the window. "How many of my signatures do you have?" she'd asked Margaret, and Margaret had hung up rather than answer, and the not answering was the answer, and the answer was, enough. Enough to make 41. Enough to bury a career under a career's worth of paper. She thought about the first time Margaret had corrected her, gently, in a conference room, on how she held a pen for a final signature. "Anchor the wrist," Margaret had said. "A tremor reads as doubt, and an inspector can't afford to look like she doubts." Adrian had taken it as kindness. She had anchored her wrist for 6 years, and Margaret had been watching the wrist not to teach her, but to learn her, filing every certainty away, and tonight there were 41 certain signatures in the world that Adrian had never made. The betrayal wasn't loud. That was what nobody told you. It didn't scream. It sat down across the table and used your own habits against you and called it mentorship. Her hand was shaking on the glass. She watched it shake. She thought, distantly, "A tremor reads as doubt?" And she pulled the hand back and made a fist and held it until it stopped. The phone rang. Unknown number. The cadence she'd learned to read. She let it ring twice while she decided. Evelyn had said only listen. Evelyn wasn't here. She answered and said nothing. Breathing on the other end. Then Margaret's voice, lower than the afternoon, careful. "You're awake. Good. I hoped you would be." Adrian stayed silent. "I'm not going to insult you," Margaret said. "You've seen the exhibit list. You know how it looks. I want to offer you something before tomorrow. Before the room, while it can still be quiet." A pause, weighed. "There's a version of tomorrow where you're a young inspector who was pressured, who was in over her head, who signed things she was told to sign. That version is survivable, Adrian. There's a plea shape in it. You'd lose the license. You wouldn't lose everything." Adrian looked at the 41 on the board's portal in her mind. "You want me to confess to signing them?" she said. "I want you to live through this. You made them." Adrian's voice was very even. "You want me to stand up tomorrow and make them true." Margaret was quiet a moment. When she spoke, it was almost tender, and that was the worst of it. "I want you to understand that fighting a thing this large, alone, with a lawyer some stranger paid for, it doesn't end the way the movies tell you. They have 41 documents and a firm and 30 years of standing. You have a folder and a bruised door. Take the shape that survives." There it was, the lowest place. A voice she'd trusted for 6 years, handing her a knife and calling it mercy, telling her the true story could not win and the false one could keep her breathing. For 1 second, she would never tell anyone this. Adrian considered it. She considered how tired she was. She considered the gray box with her name in it. She considered that no one who mattered would ever again fully believe her, plea or fight, cleared or not, because the accusation was the wound and the outcome was only a bandage. She considered saying, What would I have to sign? Then she looked at the photographs on her table. The seal, unbroken and then broken by her own hand, on the record, at 8:04, because that was the protocol, and she followed the protocol even alone in a room no one would check. The pour, the long shadow, the truth she had heard through the soles of her boots. You studied my wrist, Adrian said. Silence. For 6 years, so I wouldn't look like I doubted. She heard her own voice steady as she went. I'm not going to doubt tomorrow, Margaret. You taught me too well. She hung up first. She set the phone down. Her heart was slamming. She had just refused the only offer of survival anyone was going to make her, and the sedan was still at the curb, and the gray box still said liar, and nothing about her situation had improved. If anything, she had just made an enemy calculate harder. She stood in her kitchen at midnight and let herself feel the whole size of it. They had spent a night building a trap around her name before she'd said yes to anything. They had cleared a badge for 8 a.m. They had moved an elevator and cut the repeaters and put a man at a door. They had forged her hand 41 times, and a district inspector's hand once, and routed it all through a lab she couldn't find, and holdings that climbed to 2 names, one of which she still, tonight, could not read. And they had chosen her. She saw it plainly now, in the flat kitchen light. Not despite her being clean, but because she was clean. Her name was the cleanest thing in that building. That was the only reason it was worth stealing. Sang-wook picked the cleanest person in the building because her name was worth stealing. Taeho had said something like that in Evelyn's office, and she'd heard it then as strategy. She heard it now, alone, as the thing it was. She had been targeted for the exact quality she was proudest of. Her integrity was the reason she was in this room instead of some corner cutter who'd have signed the release on day 1 and gone home. She had been careful, and careful had put her here. She sat back down. She let that be true for a while. She didn't argue with it. Arguing with it would have been a lie, and she was done. Tonight, being handed lies. Her phone lit again. Not Margaret. A number she'd saved that afternoon. Saved without deciding to. Thumb faster than judgment. Kang Tae-ho. A text, 3 words. Still with you. She looked at it for a long time. She wanted, more than she'd let herself want anything since the door bent, to write back. How? How was he still with her? He had his own fire, a mother's building strangled with liens he hadn't signed, a family name split down the middle, an uncle who'd used his companies like a coat he'd taken off a hook. He had every reason to disappear tonight, to pull his lawyer and his security and his clean collar out of a woman's ruin and go protect his own. He hadn't. She typed. Why are you doing this? Deleted it, typed. You should protect yourself. Deleted that too. In the end, she wrote what was true. They offered me a plea, just now, Margaret. Sign that I did it and live. The dots came fast. What did you say? No. The dots came and stopped and came again. Then? Good. A plea makes their story true. Yours is the only one with a floor under it. A second message, right behind it. Sleep. Daehyun stays on the street. Nobody gets to your door tonight. She read. Nobody gets to your door. And felt her throat close, because for 11 years she'd been the only thing standing at her own door, and a stranger she'd known for one day was posting a guard on it, and she couldn't tell anymore whether that was rescue or another kind of cage, and she was too tired to decide, and so she let it be, for one night, a thing that was simply kind. Okay. She wrote. She set the phone down. She thought about how much of tonight was people telling her who to be. Margaret, telling her to be the girl who was in over her head. Voss, telling her, before any of this, that caution could return her to the street that found her. A stranger telling her to sleep. Everyone had a shape they wanted her to fold into, and under all of it, quiet, was the one voice that had never once lied to her. The floor under the west windows, the hollow ring of low-density concrete. The wall moved 41 centimeters off the grid. The building had told her the truth and asked her to be nothing at all except the person who heard it. She would be that person tomorrow. Not the girl in over her head, not the plea, the person who heard it. Then, Because the hour Evelyn had given her was long over and she couldn't sleep, and the only thing worse than working was not working, she did the small thing again. She got a legal pad. She wrote, at the top, in her own flat hand, where I was. Albany, the conference, the panel, with her name in the program and a photograph of her at a podium, time-stamped, 200 miles from a floor she was supposed to have certified that same week. She wrote the dates, she wrote the flight, the hotel, the panel time. She wrote the name of the man who'd introduced her, because he'd remember, and he owed her nothing, which made him worth more. The forgers had built a beautiful liar's calendar. They had not checked the real one. She wrote it all down, and the writing steadied her the way the pen steadies a hand when the wrist is anchored, and somewhere in the middle of it she understood that this, the pad, the dates, the one man who'd remember, this was agency. It was small. It was a woman alone at a kitchen table at 1 a.m. writing where she'd been, but it was hers, and no one had handed it to her, and it could not be forged, because it had already happened. She wrote until the list was done, then she made a second list. What I have. The folder, the photographs, the true ones, with the honest shadows. The deed still folded in the zippered pocket of the blazer over the chair, the one she hadn't shown Evelyn, the one she kept telling herself she'd show tomorrow. A lawyer who'd said, "Now you're defending yourself like a person who plans to win." A recording, bagged, in a lawyer's custody. A district inspector who'd been forged too, and might stand up and say so. She wasn't alone. She wrote it on the pad so she'd believe it. Not alone. The car at the curb, the retainer paid 40 minutes before she'd known she needed one. A man who could have put her in a car and hidden her, and had instead walked 11 blocks at her shoulder because she'd said she wanted the cameras and the daylight. It didn't make the gray box go away. Nothing tonight would. But at some point past 2, she found she had stopped shaking, and she put her head down on her folded arms on the kitchen table, on top of the 2 lists, and she slept a little, in the light, with the deadbolt thrown and the chain across and a car she hadn't asked for keeping watch on the street below. She woke at 5 to gray at the window, and a stiff neck, and the immediate, physical memory of everything, arriving all at once the way it does, the half-second of nothing, and then the full weight landing. She did not lie there and let it press her flat. She got up. She stood in the shower until the water ran cold and thought about nothing. She dried off and went to the closet and stood in front of it a long time, because what you wear to be called a liar in a public room is not a small question. She reached for black, the safe thing, the invisible thing. Her hand stopped. She took down the emerald blouse instead, the drapeado neckline, the one she wore when she wanted a room to remember she was there. Ivory trousers, high-waisted, the cognac boots. She dressed the way she dressed to be seen, because hiding today was the same as agreeing, and she was done agreeing. She clipped on the gold. She put the earrings back on the dresser, and chose different ones, because the first pair belonged to yesterday's woman, and she was somebody else now, harder, with a list. Last, the blazer from the chair. She unzipped the inside pocket and checked, with 2 fingers, that the folded deed was still there, dry, real. The second name on it she still had not let herself read straight through. It was there. She left it there. She'd decide, at the table, in front of Evelyn and the one man who'd walked 11 blocks, whether today was the day it came out. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman there had a suspension flag on the public record, and 41 forged signatures with her name on them, and a mentor who'd offered her a plea at midnight, and a career that as of yesterday meant liar to anyone who searched. The woman there had a folder and 2 lists and a pin of light below the outer corner of her right eye, and a way of holding her wrist so she wouldn't look like she doubted. She anchored the wrist. She practiced her own signature once on the corner of the legal pad, the flat crossbar, the fall of the tail, slow, sure, the real one, the one they'd copied but could never make her way, because they'd copied the shape and not the hand. It came out clean. Her phone buzzed. Evelyn. "Car for you downstairs in 20. You up?" Adrian typed back. "Dressed, I'm bringing everything." A pause. Then, "Everything?" Adrian looked at the blazer, at the pocket, at the folded thing inside it that tied the whole chain up to 2 names. One she'd read and one she'd been afraid to. Everything, she wrote. She put the 2 lists in the folder. She put the folder under her arm. She poured the cold tea from last night down the sink and rinsed the cup and set it in the rack, because she was coming back to this apartment as one thing or another, cleared or ruined, and either way she was not coming back to a dirty cup. At the door she stopped, hand on the deadbolt, and let herself feel, one last time, how far down she'd been sent. Named a liar in the one place the public looked. Suspended before she'd been heard. Offered survival on the condition that she make the lie true with her own mouth. Isolated on purpose, targeted for her cleanness, sitting at a kitchen table at midnight with a mentor's voice in her ear, telling her the true story, could not win. She had said no anyway. That was the only thing she'd built in the night, and it was small, and it was everything. She had reached the bottom, and at the bottom she had made a decision, and the decision was to go up. She threw the deadbolt. She unhooked the chain. She opened her own door and stepped out into the gray hallway that smelled like the building breathing, and she went down the 4 flights the way she'd come up them at 22, one hand on the rail, except this time she was dressed to be seen, and she had a folder under her arm, and a car she hadn't asked for waiting at the curb. The lobby door swung shut behind her. Cold morning. Daehyun was out of the sedan and holding the rear door, and past him, on the far corner, a second figure stood waiting who had not been there last night, tall, collar open, and Adrian stopped on the bottom step because she understood that whatever the room did to her in 3 hours, she was not walking in alone, and the understanding hit her harder than any of the cruelty had, and she had to breathe once through her nose before she trusted her voice. "Okay," she said, to no one, to the morning, to the woman she'd been at the kitchen table. "Okay." She crossed the sidewalk. She did not get in the car. She looked at Daehyun, and she looked at the tall figure on the corner, and she said, "I'm walking the last part, cameras, daylight, same as yesterday." And she started east, toward the forum, toward the room, toward the 41 signatures and the gray box and the people who'd built the night around her name, dressed in emerald, folder under her arm, the false calendar in her memory, and the true one on a legal pad. The second name still folded against her ribs, and today, at last, the day she'd read it out loud. Behind her, 2 men fell into step, one at each shoulder, and the 3 of them went toward the light. The forum steps were wet from a hose someone had run at dawn, and Adrian climbed them without touching the rail. Evelyn waited under the columns, folio against her chest, a paralegal at her elbow with a rolling case. She looked at Adrian's clothes first. The emerald, the ivory, the gold at her ears. "Good," Evelyn said. "You look like the certificate is real." "It is real. I know. Now the room has to." Taeho stopped at the bottom step. He did not follow her up. Daehyun stood 2 paces behind him, hands loose, watching the street more than the building. Taeho lifted his chin at her, once, and let her go alone toward the doors. That was the arrangement. She had asked for it, and he had agreed without argument. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than the anger it would hold. 12 rows of seats, a raised bench with 3 chairs, a long table on the left for the firm, a long table on the right for her. Adrian set the folder down and squared it with the table edge. Voss came in at 8:51. Navy suit, folder of his own, a man who had knotted his tie in a mirror that told him he would win. He did not look at her. Margaret came in behind him, cream jacket, a leather folio pressed flat under one arm, and she did look, straight across the room, and held it, and then sat. Song-wook came last, gray, silver at the temples, collar bare of any mark. He chose the far end of the firm's table, 1 chair apart, the way a man sits when he wants the room to believe he only wandered in. Adrian felt her wrist want to shake. She set her hand flat on the folder and remembered the word Margaret had drilled into her for 6 years. Anchor. She anchored. The second table filled behind her, Evelyn on her right, the paralegal beyond, the rolling case tucked under the table skirt, where the sealed phone waited in its bag. Adrian kept her eyes forward. She had 2 lists in her head from a kitchen table the night before. Where I was. What I have. She ran them once, in order, like a person checking a ladder before she climbs it. A clerk logged the exhibits. The stenographer settled her hands. Somewhere a radiator ticked. The chair of the panel called the matter. Case number, license number. The charge read aloud in a flat municipal voice. Falsification of structural certifications. The firm's counsel rose first, because the firm had filed, and the firm believed it owned the morning. He laid out the 41 documents in a fan across the table like a dealer, floor by floor, month by month, each one carrying her signature and her 7 digits. He asked the panel to make the suspension permanent and refer the matter to the district attorney. The pattern speaks, he said. Miss Cole certified a sealed floor. Repeatedly. The badge log shows her acting alone. We are not here to argue motive. We are here to protect the public from an inspector who signs what she is paid to sign. He sat. He believed he had already finished. Evelyn stood. She did not raise her voice. She never did. May I approach the exhibit screen? The chair nodded. Evelyn's paralegal put 2 photographs side by side on the wall. Both showed the same anchor plate. 6 bolts. The same rectangle of poured concrete under the west windows. These are the same plate, Evelyn said. Photographed twice. My client's photograph is time-stamped 8/31. Look at the shadow. She let them look. The shadow off the bolt heads fell long, raked, the way a shadow falls when the sun is still low. Now the firm's exhibit, the certificate photograph, she tapped. Same plate, shorter shadow, 9 o'clock light. A full half hour after my client had already left the building and called it in. The counsel started to rise. The chair lifted one finger, and he sat back down. 2 photographs, Evelyn said, of the same sealed floor, taken 30 minutes apart, by 2 different people. My client took the first, someone else took the second. On a floor, the city had ordered no one to enter. Adrian watched the panel's faces change by a single degree. That was all it took, a single degree. The firm's counsel tried to reach for it. Timestamps can be altered. A phone clock proves. The city's own seal photograph carries the same clock, Evelyn said, without looking up. 8:04. My client photographed your seal before she broke it. The seal, the pour, the shadow, 1 camera, 1 hour. If her clock lies, then the seal she was accused of breaking was never intact. You can't have it both ways. Pick one. He did not pick one. He sat. Evelyn was not done with the light. She magnified the bolts. There is a mark on these heads. A batch stamp. She read the string of it aloud. Slow, so the stenographer caught every character. 1 batch. Large orders route through 1 purchase order. 1 purchase order names 1 buyer, 1 delivery address. She handed a folder to the panel. Freight manifest, subpoenaed from the Newark supplier. The batch on those bolts shipped on a single order, delivered to a job trailer. The trailer is registered to Iron Phoenix Urban. She let the name sit in the air. Received and signed for, Evelyn said, at the dock, by hand. She turned the page for them. The receiving signature reads Kang Sang-wook. At the far end of the firm's table, the gray man did not move. That stillness was its own answer, and Adrian saw the panel register it too. The firm's counsel found his feet. The manifest proves a purchase. Contractors buy hardware. This proves nothing about my client's filings. I'm not finished, Evelyn said. She brought up a 3rd document, a demolition order, emergency, signed under the name of a district inspector. Daniel Ruiz, she said. District inspector for Halston Tower, 4 years, 22 on the job. This order calls for the emergency demolition of the Crown. Mr. Ruiz never wrote it. The panel can hear that from him directly. He is in the hall. The chair conferred, one head to another, then nodded. Bring the witness. Ruiz came in with his reading glasses pushed up into his hair and the reflective municipal vest folded over one arm, the way a man carries proof of what he actually is. He took the oath. He kept his hands on the rail. I never inspected the Crown, he said. It was sealed. Sealing it out was my recommendation 3 weeks ago. I never signed a demolition order. I never would. Evelyn put the forged signature on the screen beside a real one from his file. Tell the panel what's wrong with it. Ruiz leaned in. His jaw worked once. The middle initial? I stopped using my middle initial in 2009. Whoever copied this pulled an old sample, an old signature card. He turned his head slightly toward Adrian's table without meaning to. Same as hers. They didn't copy us from life. They copied us from a drawer. The room was very quiet. The demolition order and the certification came out of the same drawer, Ruiz said. I'd stake my license on it. I did stake my license. That's why I'm here. The counsel tried once. Inspector, you were listed as Miss Cole's emergency contact. You have a relationship with the accused. Isn't your testimony? I was listed, Ruiz said, because in 4 years, she's the one inspector who ever returned my calls the same day. He did not raise his voice. That's the relationship. She reads what's in front of her. So do I. That's why they had to forge us both instead of buying us. He stepped down. He walked back toward the doors and, passing the firm's table, he did not look at Voss, and the not looking was louder than a shout. Evelyn stayed on her feet. One more record. She served the flight log. Margaret Hart returned early from Zurich. Her testimony would have you believe she flew home in response to a crisis. The booking record tells the hour of the reservation. She read it. 23:41 the night before. 9 hours before my client broke the seal on that floor. 9 hours before there was any crisis at all. She set the paper down gently, which was worse than slamming it. She booked a return flight to an emergency, Evelyn said, that had not yet been allowed to happen. Margaret's hand moved on her folio. Adrian watched her mentor's fingers, the fingers that had taught her to anchor a wrist, press flat against the leather, and go white at the knuckle. Then Margaret stood, without being asked, and the firm's counsel reached for her sleeve and missed. I'll speak, Margaret said. Counsel, the chair began. I'll speak. Margaret's voice was even. It was the same voice that had corrected Adrian's drawings for 6 years, patient, certain. And Adrian felt something in her chest tear along an old seam. Martin called me at 11:30, the night before. He said the coal problem would be handled in the morning. He told me to have a reason to be back. Margaret, Voss said, low. She did not turn to him. I kept her signatures, for years. Every card, every drawing, filed by project and year. I told myself I kept them the way you keep any good record. Her mouth thinned. I was told the floor would be condemned quietly, that the certificates would sit in a drawer and never be tested. Nobody was supposed to open the wall. She looked at Adrian then. The look was not an apology. It was a woman watching the only student who had ever refused her. You were always going to open the wall, Margaret said. That was the flaw in the plan. They picked the one person who checks. She turned back to the panel. He called me at 11:30. It's in the log. Everything is in the log. I taught her that too. She sat. Voss's face had gone the color of the table. The firm's counsel asked for a recess. The chair looked at the two tables, at the one client who had just testified against the other, and did not grant it yet. That was when Tejo stood. He had come in at some point during Ruiz. Adrian had not seen him enter. He was not on any witness list. He rose from the back row and moved to the rail, and the room turned to look at the size of him, the collar open, the phoenix at his neck, a man who had never once tried to be small. I'm not a witness, they called, he said. I'll be one if the panel allows it. The chair studied him. Name: Kang Tae-ho. He let it land. He watched Sang-wook's chair when he said it. The firm's counsel wants the panel to think this is a family dispute between two men with the same last name. So let me put the family on the record. He set the cracked phone on the rail. Evelyn's paralegal came forward and confirmed the bag, the seal, the chain of custody, the unbroken line from the moment it left the worker's hand. This phone belonged to the man sent to hold Miss Cole on the 60th floor, Tejo said. The recording ran the whole time. There is a voice on it. Above Voss, clipped. Patient. It asks one question. He looked down the table at his uncle. It asks if it's done. He did not play it yet. He let the room want it. The bolts were bought on one order, he said. The freight was signed for by hand. The deed under the holdings was signed by the same hand as trustee. The liens strangling my mother's building, 11 units she has owned for 30 years, were filed under names she never signed, one of them mine. His jaw set. Same method, same drawer, same man who chose the cleanest inspector in the building, because a clean name was worth stealing. Sang-wook rose. Elegant, unhurried, a man reaching for the last frame that might still fit. This is grief, he said, dressed as evidence. My nephew and I have a business disagreement. He has brought it into a public room to embarrass a family. Evelyn nodded at the paralegal. The recording played. Is it done? 3 words. English, clipped, patient. The voice in the room and the voice on the phone were the same voice. Everyone heard it at once. Sang-wook heard it too, and for a half-second his face did the thing a face does when it hears itself, and cannot pretend it is someone else. He stopped talking. The chair let the silence hold. Then the chair looked at Adrian, and for the first time all morning addressed her directly. Miss Cole, you have sat quietly. Is there anything you wish to enter? Adrian stood. Her wrist was steady now. She had practiced this at a kitchen table until the tremor left it. One thing. She unzipped the inside pocket she had guarded since 8:39 the day before. She took out the deed, folded into quarters, the paper soft at the creases from being carried against her body for a day and a night. She had not shown it to Evelyn. She had not shown it to Taeho. She unfolded it now, on the table, under the light, and turned it so the panel could see the chain. I took 1 page out of the folder before I ran, she said. I kept it on me. I didn't hand it to my lawyer, because if it lived in one bag, it could disappear from one bag, so it lived on me. She traced the chain of holdings with a finger, the way she read a plat, honest and slow, and she read the 2 names at the top out loud for the first time, straight through, the way she had not been able to the day before. The chain ends in 2 names, she said. The first is Han River Property Partners. She looked at Taeho. His used without him. His signature is nowhere on the transfers. She moved her finger up 1 line. The second name is the trustee, the one that receives the bolts, signs the freight, files the liens, and holds the deed to 400 families' homes. She looked at the gray man who had gone still at the end of the table. Kang Sang-wook. She said it plainly. No heat, just the name, read from a document, by a woman with a license and no reason to lie. That had been the whole point, Taeho had told her. It had to come from her, and it did. You built a floor to fall, Adrian said. Low-density pour under the west windows, a wall pulled 41 centimeters off the grid, a cavity behind the panel where you kept the proof so it would burn with the building. The collapse was insurance, and it was noise. An investigation freezes the projects. Frozen projects freeze the litigation. Freeze it long enough and 400 families give up and move, and your holdings buy the empty buildings for nothing. She kept her voice level. And my clean license was the paper reason it all looked legal. I was the reason a crime got to wear a certificate. The room did not breathe. You only made 1 mistake, she said. The door on the 60th stuck shut instead of open, and the wrong number reached the wrong man. She did not look at Taeho when she said it. She did not have to. The chair asked her to sit. She sat. Her hands were quiet in her lap. The firm's counsel made a last motion because he was paid to. The recording, the manifest, the deed. The panel cannot treat coincidence as conspiracy. It isn't coincidence, Evelyn said, and she stood 1 final time. 3 forgeries, Miss Cole's signature, Inspector Ruiz's signature, the certifications, 3 different victims, 1 drawer, 1 purchase order, 1 trustee's hand at the bottom of the deed. She closed her folio. That isn't coincidence. That's a method, and a method has an author. She sat. The panel recessed to read findings. It did not take long. When they came back, the chair read from a single page in a voice that had lost its earlier flatness. The certification charge against Adrian Cole, withdrawn, in full. The 41 documents referred to the district attorney as forgeries. Martin Voss, standing suspended, pending criminal review. Margaret Hart, license surrendered, effective immediately, cooperation noted. The freight manifest, the deed, the demolition order, and the recording, transmitted to the office handling conspiracy. The chair set the page down and looked at Adrian. Miss Cole, your license is restored as of this reading. The board regrets the interval. Adrian stood. Because you stand for that. She said thank you, because you say it. Her voice did not shake. Sang-wook left before the chair finished the last line. He walked out with his chin level, the way a man walks when he is deciding, in real time, how much of his life he can still carry. In the corridor, Daehyun stood against the wall, and past him, near the elevators, 2 men in windbreakers had arranged themselves without hurry. The way men arrange themselves when a manifest has just entered the public record, and they have been waiting for exactly that. Sang-wook saw them. His step did not change, but it cost him something to keep it that way. Adrian came out of the room into the corridor and stopped. The morning had turned. Somewhere in the last hour the gray had burned off the tall windows. Voss came out behind his counsel and turned, once, to find her. He had a thing he wanted to say. She could see it building in his jaw, the old cordial thing he used on clients, the thing that had emptied a room of oxygen the first evening when he did not stand up as she left. She stood up now, fully. She looked at him until the thing died in his throat, and then she turned her shoulder to him, which was the only sentence he deserved, and he took it. Evelyn came up beside her, closing the rolling case. "You held the deed back from me." "Yes." "For a day?" "Yes." Evelyn almost smiled. "Never do that again." "I won't have to." Taeho waited at the top of the forum steps, not the bottom this time. He had let her cross the whole room alone, and now he was simply there, hands open, the way he had stood in a broken doorway the day before with nothing in his hands to prove he meant no harm. "You read the name," he said. "I read it straight through. It had to be you." "I know why now." She looked out at the street, at the light on it. A clean name was worth stealing, so a clean name was the only thing that could take it back. He walked her down. Daehyun brought the sedan to the curb, and, for the first time, Adrian did not refuse it. She just did not need it either. She stood on the sidewalk in the sun, with the folder under her arm and the folded deed back inside it where it belonged, reintegrated into the record. One page returned to the pile it had been torn from to survive. "My mother's building," Taeho said. "The liens come off the second the conspiracy office moves. Weeks, not years, for that part." She had read enough deeds to know which knots loosen fast. 11 units, 30 years. She keeps them. He nodded. Something in the enormous shoulders came down half an inch, a weight set finally on the ground. "And the 400? That's the slow part," Adrian said. "One deed at a time. Somebody has to read every chain, unwind every transfer, sign the honest side of every page in her own hand." She looked at him. "I'm going to be that somebody." "You're going back to the firm?" "No," she said it without heat. "The firm has my name on the door for 6 years of my signatures. I don't want a door with my name on it. I want a door that told the truth." He looked at her, not understanding yet. She did not explain. She had learned from him the value of letting a person arrive at a thing themselves. She opened Cole Urban Preservation 3 weeks later, 2 rooms, 3 blocks from the forum, above a print shop that ran warm through the floor. She did the reading herself. Chain by chain, family by family. Every honest signature in her own hand, the crossbar flat, the tail dropped, the wrist anchored, the way a woman signs who has watched her own name used against her and taken it back. She bought one thing for the office that was not a desk or a lamp. She called the building manager at Halston, then the salvage contractor, and she bought the fire door off the 60th floor, the interior one, the cheap-latched steel slab whose strike plate still sat bent sideways in the frame from a single kick. She paid the cost of the hall and not $1 more. They thought she was strange for wanting it. She let them. She hung it on the wall of the front room, over a small brass plate, where every client who came in with a stolen home and a folder of forged pages would pass it before they sat down. The mother's building came first, the way she had promised. 11 units, 30 years, the liens lifted by court order at the old rents, and an old Korean woman Adrian had never met sent word through her son that the inspector could come by any Sunday and there would be food. Adrian went on a Sunday. She did not talk about the case. She read the deed at the kitchen table, confirmed the chain was clean, and let herself be fed. Taeho started coming by on Thursdays. He never made a thing of it. He would stand in front of the door for a moment each time, reading the bent strike plate the way other men read a painting, and then he would sit and they would work. Voss took a plea in the spring. Margaret's surrender went uncontested. She never fought it, which was, in the end, the closest she came to being the person she had pretended to be. Sang-wook's lawyers billed by the year, and every motion they filed to make it smaller only made the public file thicker, the caption at the top of every page reading the one word he had tried so hard to keep off it: conspiracy. Daniel Ruiz sent a note. 2 lines, in the hand with no middle initial. He was staying on as a field inspector. He had decided the drawer full of old signatures was a reason to keep signing new ones, not a reason to stop. Adrienne kept the note in the top drawer of her desk, under the deeds she had not yet unwound. On a Thursday near the end of that first season, a client stood in the doorway of Cole Urban Preservation, with a folder held to her chest, the exact way Evelyn once held a folio, and she looked at the steel door on the wall, the bent latch, the brass plate under it, and she asked the question everyone asked. "You left a firm that almost had your name on it," she said, "for a broken door." Adrienne looked at the strike plate, kicked sideways, a lifetime and a day ago, the one part of that whole tower that had done exactly what it was built to do, and told her the truth about it while it did. "That door is the only part of the building," she said, "that never lied to me." She pulled out a chair for the woman, and she opened the folder, and she began to read. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever refused to sign your name to a lie, knowing the people above you would make you pay for it? Have you ever found the truth hidden behind a wall and realized the ones who trained you were the ones who framed you? When a stranger answered the call meant for someone else, would you have trusted the hand that finally opened the door? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about truth, karma, and redemption, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.